call us to order here for the Planning Commission for the City of Grand Rapids on Thursday, September 26, 2024. We have 3 cases on the agenda, plus a deep dive into the latter half of the Community Master Plan. The way we'll proceed through our cases today is we'll have a staff person present the case to the Commission, and the applicant will then add any additional information they would like to share. For the public hearing cases, we'll open up the public hearing for anyone to come up and address the Commission. You'll have 3 minutes to state your name, share your thoughts with the Commission. We'll close the public hearing, invite the applicant back up to make any additional comments, and then the Commission will turn to deliberations. The Commission does have prepared for us by staff resolution language that is written both for and against each outcome. And so sometimes we read that language, but it's not because the decisions have already been made. And commissioners, do we have any conflicts of interest to share? Seeing none, we'll get started. Elizabeth, or Crystal?
Oh, yeah, actually, I'm going to take this one. All right. So Planning Commission did receive a communication on this case that was emailed to you. And is there any other discussion, or just go and, do you want me to go ahead?
Well, yeah. Yeah, so we have a question at hand, which is this case was heard before, presented and heard before, and there was a public hearing on the case where people had the opportunity to come up and share their thoughts. This is back before us now because we asked it to come back to see the final design of both the materials on the building and the site layout and so forth. And so we have a pretty narrow objective for discussing the case today. However, we have had a member of the public who has requested to contribute to the discussion. And so first thing we want to do is decide if we want to reopen the public hearing to make room for that additional input from the public.
Would it be reopening or simply offering the opportunity for public input for the site plan review?
What you said, Kyle, the public hearing would be the required, that would refer to public hearings required under the Zoning Enabling Act. This scenario is site plan review. No public hearing is required, but Planning Commission, in its discretion under its bylaws, can take public comment for a site plan review or for anything before the Commission. So it would be if the Commission wants to take public comment today. Correct, Kyle?
Traditionally, we would have the presentation first.
Yep.
Does that make sense to do the presentation?
So, yeah.
Especially so that if a member of the public would like to comment, they could comment specifically on what we're discussing? Okay.
Yep, okay. Okay, I can move forward with our presentation. So as Commissioner Roseboom, I was going to say Palm, sorry. Commissioner Roseboom stated, this is back before you in June of 2023. The Planning Commission did grant special land use approval for the amphitheater. That approval was subject to several conditions, including a condition that building design and materials are subject to final site plan review. So your purview today is to that effect. The staff report that was prepared for you is, I think, thorough. I hope so. I hope you find that to be true. But given the nature of the project, I'm actually going to go through the review very briefly from a staff perspective, because the applicant, Progressive, has prepared a SketchUp or fly-through model that I think is far more illustrative than some of the 2D renderings that are included in your packet. The scale of the building made it a little bit challenging for us to look at our building element requirements and apply it as we typically would, in that this is not your traditional mixed-use development. This is a purpose-built structure for the amphitheater. And so our staff report really focused on what we felt like were the appropriate themes or elements of our ordinance, things like transparency, the pedestrian scale, the orientation, the high-quality materials. So the staff report really centers around those components of the building element requirements. We also thought it would be appropriate to look at how the building functions, so behind the walls. If you look at the floor plan, you can see that different spaces of the amphitheater serve a different function. So the plaza, for example, that fronts on Monroe is intended to either be pre-event space or open to the public. And so looking at what building element requirements are appropriate for that type of function. Through our administrative review, we divided the project up into 4 spaces and then went through and described what the facade materials were, transparency, weather expression line, and the specific building materials that are proposed for that space. We felt like that was the most logical way to proceed with our review. Hopefully you agree, but we can certainly have that dialogue if there's any components of our review that you feel would be helpful. So the 4 areas that we looked at were that public plaza space, which is really serving that primary entrance to the amphitheater that is adjacent Market Avenue. There's an office or back of house space towards the south end of the structure, where probably the most transparency is added, given the floor plan or what's happening, the functionality of the space behind the wall. Of course, there's the river entrance. You may recall, as part of this project, the city will retain a 50-foot swath of land along the riverfront, which is planned for a Riverwalk pedestrian space. So being really mindful of how the amphitheater entrance interacts with that space and what material choices and design decisions are made. We felt that that was a critical element for the Planning Commission's review. And then lastly, looking at the canopy or the drum shell of the space. It's obviously significant massing. Looking at the design and the materials of that, I think is also critical. And so, unless there are specific questions for me, I think I would like to turn it over to Progressive AE to go through their presentation. Oops, I wasn't keeping up with my slides, I'm sorry. So we can see, and this should mimic your staff report very easily, the center, if you will, of the image in front of you is that plaza space that I've referenced. On the left of the screen or on the south end of the amphitheater fronting on Market is that office type area. Trying to recall what we called it in the staff report, sorry, scroll. The office and back of house activities. And then at the, you can see, of course, the drum shell is highlighted with the metal shingles. And keep going. You can see on this slide is the riverfront entrance that is accessed, of course, from the west side. Here. So these elevations highlight all of the proposed materials. Samples are available that were brought today as well. So I think Progressive is planning to show them to you. Certainly they're available to pass around. Some of them I think are a little bit heavier than others, so we can play that by ear depending on what your desire is to touch or feel or see the materials choices closer up. You can see the Market Avenue elevation from the overhead. You can see that plaza space. This should look very similar as it was incorporated into your June 2023 review, where during non-event times that space is open to the public, which I think is important when we talk about what material choices, what articulation is planned for that space. And during event times, it is fenced and gated, so the general public without tickets would not have access to it. Here is looking from the southeast back towards the amphitheater. You can see that drum shell structure. This is a closer rendering of the back of house office space. You can see again, pretty significant transparency. We calculated at approximately 58%. And this is I think the closest point of the building to Market Avenue, to where that pedestrian public sidewalk would be. can see the canopy structure that would project up and over the stage. And then this is looking from the northeast back towards the amphitheater. To the right side of the image is the primary entrance. You can see the yellow perforated metal panels being used as the gate system that would be open during event times for individuals to pass through to get to the concert or event. And of course, they'd be closed during non-event times. A little closer rendering of that. And then the floor plan, just to make sure that we're clear on the functionality of the spaces that are enclosed and not enclosed within the amphitheater. Architectural elevations have been provided and are shown on the screen, and were also included in your packet. Again, the scale of the building makes it a little bit more difficult than maybe a traditional architectural rendering or elevation that's provided in your packet. Hence the reason I'm asking Progressive to run through the SketchUp model. All right, I will turn it over to Derek.
Quick question before you do is the overlay district requirements, are those relieved because of the city is taking ownership over what's happening right at the river's edge, or does it still apply?
It does, the Grand River Overlay District requirements would still apply. It's still within the river overlay. I think the application of that, there is some nuances, of course, because there is not direct, the private property does not have a setback from the, in this case, the flood wall. So there are some nuances, but it still generally applies.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Derek Molinar. I'm an architect at Progressive Companies. Behind me, I've got Bill Colhane. He's a owner's representative for Grand Action. If we have any additional questions, he can help answer those. Kristen, you did a wonderful job introducing and going through what we prepared in the submittal. I did bring some additional information today that I'll share with you as I kind of go through, but I won't walk through the same images that we already talked about. I'd like to go more in depth in terms of the materiality of the building, what we're trying to represent through the 2D images. So we'll start on Market Street, and this would be the primary elevation with that frontal plaza. Our methodology, or our thinking through all material selection, is that we're looking for materials that have longevity, that have low maintenance. And so hard, dense, materials that don't require a lot of upkeep is the methodology. The primary material on the building is a natural stone. It's a high-density limestone from the state of Wisconsin. Bill, I don't know if you can be Vanna White for a second. This particular one is pretty heavy, so I don't know that it's that easy to pass around. The sample is just a material sample from a product representative. We did construct a mock-up on site, and that's what I have on the screen here. We're looking at a long horizontal-oriented stone. It has multiple different colorations to different units. So there's a rust vein, and then there's also a slightly darker, more gray-colored vein of coloration throughout the blend. But in general, it's a warm, neutral stone that should hold up for a very long time. Should you choose to see it outside this meeting, it is on site down on the parking lot where the construction trailers are. The other main materials on the building, so everything from above the first floor level, you start to see a white material in the renderings. That's a polycarbonate material, and the intention with this material is that it's translucent. It's not a window system, but it lets light through, and that there's a solid wall behind it. And behind that material, we have continuous lighting that would activate this facade. That lighting is color changing. So at different times of the year, the coding of the coloration can change. For example, during July, we can fly red, white, and blue across the facade of the building. We're not looking to do flashes of color or changes of color. It's a continuous wash along one edge of the material, and it just provides an ambient glow to those upper levels of the project. We've got more traditional glass storefront at the administrative buildings, and then the other main material around the drum is a zinc shingle. Which, yeah, next bill. That is a naturally patining material of a thick gauge zinc. We've got two samples here. One, this product comes pre-patinaed. So one sample is maybe the minimum coverage of that patina. The other sample is the more severe case of pre-patina, but the idea is that this material is going to weather naturally over time, and it will gray out, so it will become more white over time. It'll start out as a deep gray color. Okay. In some of the renderings, we saw a lot of different metals, which begin to accent fence line, the gates, and the upper canopy. Those are really small samples, but we think that those I'm happy to pass those around. We brought them, but we think they're less important to the overall story of the project. I did bring an updated rendering, which begins to show a lot of these components in context. So this is overhead, kind of to the page right is the Market Street off-ramp coming off 131. And so this shows the Market Street entrance, the gateways. That Market Street Plaza is in the front of the image. And what you see over top of all the food and beverage along that plaza is I think the easiest way to describe it is a hangar door, so like an airplane hangar door. It flips upward. And so what's on top of that door becomes the facade of the building as it's turned down for 4 or 5 days of the week. That will lock all those functions down so that public use can happen outside of that food and beverage building, whether there's a need for it or not. You can see also in a couple of areas there are vomitories or hallways which pass through the building. That's how you enter the actual venue. There will be roll-down gates at the backs of those vomitories so that whole area locks down separately from the big event venue. Okay? I brought one additional image of the Riverside entrance. This one in particular, I think the elevation is, it condenses a lot of layers. And so what you see here, what you experience from the Riverside is very, very much fronted with the ornamental gating and a lot of the masonry facades that exist from the first floor down. The elements which rise up on the right-hand side of the image, those are those illuminated upper facade elements. And then there's a little bit of corrugated metal in the very back of the image, which is a 22 gauge painted metal surface. Okay. In context with the rest of the riverfront development, I think this paints a pretty illustrative picture of our intention for how we see the riverfront being developed. Okay. And then finally, I did bring the model. You can tell there's a difference in visual quality between one or the other. But if the commissioners have any additional questions, I'm happy to navigate to certain portions of the project. But I'll just take you through a few areas that were under discussion already. This is the view from the riverfront, the integration of the entry gates and the first monumental stair, which gets people up onto the elevated concourse level that links into the upper row of the bowl, of the seated bowl. So that upper concourse links all the way around to the other side, and we have a very similar condition on the Market Street side with a monumental stair and a small bridge connection. This is a lot of the riverfront development work and a continuous connected fire lane and pedestrian path which circles the project. And then over to Market side. We've got the similar monumental stair and bridge connection to the upper concourse, the main entry gates, the Market Street Plaza, that dark area is those overhead doors that are flipped up. The main Market Street elevation. And then the back of house, the loading dock and refuse collection area of the project. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to tell you more. I'm happy to answer any additional questions that you have.
Thank you. Related to the lit panels on the west entrance, are those the same material as the ones on the Market, just kind of a bigger scale? And I guess what are the plans similar in terms of?
Yep, materials are the same. Everywhere we've got the translucent panels, we also have lighting associated with it.
Okay.
Okay.
And it'll be uniform around and not flashing and
Right.
all that? Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
You'll note that there is a suggested condition should the Planning Commission decide to approve the renderings, the building element requirements, that there's some limitations on how the lighting can function to make sure that it's consistent with the ordinance requirements that talk about no flashing, blinking, oscillating, that there's some controls there so it doesn't become a nuisance.
Can you talk a little bit more about the south wall? I know you call it back of house, but it will be visible.
Yep.
Were there design options that could make that more attractive?
We think this wall is a prime site for future development. So the intent with the budget allocated dollars was not to spend, to put our money back here. So we have held that this is a single skin, I brought a perforated sample came, not a, we're looking at a corrugated metal panel, a thicker gauge, and it's a painted finish. My sample is perforated. It is not intended to be perforated. But through patterning, we think we can make an attractive facade with the way that we break up the wall and shift the pattern. I think we can create an attractive facade.
Are you able to go down more to street level
Yep.
in this model to show how much of that wall may or may not be visible? Yep. So certainly that elevation will be visible. There's been quite a bit of discussion about landscaping. Should the site remain in this current state, the Planning Commission would also have the ability to look at any potential artwork, for example, should this be the I guess, final or long-term state as a mitigating measure. But there are discussions very clearly that have taken place at City Commission to look at bonds for the potential parking structure to be at this location. So there's ongoing conversations about what this space will be, but that is definitely an item for the Planning Commission to consider, that should there not be development at this location, and this is the long-term visual, is this appropriate for a side elevation, or would the Planning Commission want to see a greater mix of materials? So that's something that's up for discussion.
Yeah, I can't help but think of the arena with the expansion to the south that hasn't been built by Earhart yet. After all these years. Oh, thank you. Can you talk also about the zinc material? And I think we're all familiar with the David D. Hunting YMCA. Is that the same material that has not held up so well there?
I don't think it's the same material. I think it's a thicker gauge. We're looking at interlocking joints so that we're not allowing water to get behind it. We think that'll improve the installation of this particular system.
Can you go back to the riverfront side of it, the riverfront entrance? Yeah, I wonder about that, and I wonder if you can comment on the design around that entrance. Those are, I guess, those are fairly monolithic, fairly large walls. I don't know how that feels when you're walking in there.
So the walls are there for sound containment primarily. They serve a real function to keep all the sound from the event from traveling over the river. So that's why they're there. We think that the beauty of the material itself is going to make it feel humane. We're not against a big concrete wall or CMU block. Most of the close experience that you get to that masonry wall is actually inside the event venue. Everywhere else outside the gates, we're trying to front it with a lot of landscaping.
Yeah, I would think. I don't know how it would feel walking through those gates. I guess, or if there's even art or something on those walls, right? Could be something that kind of humanize that space. Otherwise,
Got floating people.
yeah. So the intention here is you'd walk up the stairs in your image here to get into the under canopy seating, and then the stairs to the left for the lawn seating. Is that right?
So lawn seating is up the monumental stair as well.
Okay.
Both, either option. Either option does work, off the back or directly off this.
Yeah.
Those that have seats lower in the bowl are likely traveling along that concourse to get to their seat.
Okay.
And those gates at the back, the west entrance there, the gold metal that we're seeing, those will be closed during non-event times?
Those will be closed most of the time, yeah.
Maybe swing back to the market side. I'd like to understand a little bit better how. So, the airplane hangar door you mentioned is the black horizontal, quote unquote, roof on the concession stand with the logo on it there. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So during non-event times, this area is open to pedestrians and public. Is that correct?
Yes, and that would flip down, and it ends up becoming the facade of the building. We're looking at it's an aluminum metal for weather reasons or for longevity reasons, but there's a finish on the face of the metal that makes it look like a hot rolled steel. So it's a dark mottled metal. That's it.
What do we envision the use of this is? Like, how would this space be used during non-event times, would you envision?
We talked about any given day, food trucks being able to roll up into this plaza and offer lunch to anyone around the city. If there are special events that want to take place, the facility could offer food and beverage service out of one or two of the windows, so the whole facade is independent in individual pieces. Certain portions can open up and certain ones cannot. We're providing, we're making sure that our restrooms are conditioned all year long. So they're heated and they're air conditioned, and the bathroom is closest to this location can be opened and utilized by the public, but in a default state is closed and locked down. So it's on event request only, let's say. Yep, go ahead.
Hi, Bill Culhane, representing Grand Action. I just wanted to add one thing to what Derek said. We've talked to the CAA, who will be the operator of the facility, and this will be open and operate on non-event days very much like a public park. So it'll be dawn to dusk. If somebody wanted to come in and have lunch on a, afternoon, or if they were out exploring the city and they wanted a place for a respite, this would be open generally during non-program times. So it would operate very much like a public park.
Okay, thank you. These are very helpful. So I think we're going to invite public comment at this time. So again, state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to share your thoughts on the situation.
Oh, I got turned off. Ron Vanderveen of Cunningham Dahlman PC, or Boston Glacier is our assumed name in Grand Rapids here. Attorneys for 3 of the residents in the Plaza Towers. We'd like to say that, first off, this is a beautiful facility. It's a beautiful facility with one fatal mistake. There's no sound protection for the high-rise residents to the northeast. That's called out in the soundscape engineer's report that the city engaged. It's called out in the report, the Colano report that our clients engaged. There's no protection for the sound there. Now, basically, if you take the stage and you shoot out straight to the northeast, just above the sound barriers that are there, the berm, you hit the 10th floor of the Plaza Tower. It's a 32-story building with the residential condos somewhere around the 15th story they start and go up. There's no protection there for it. Now, we talk about DBA sound readings, which the developer projected, and we talk about DBC sound readings in our material, and that's confusing. I have to admit that. But what it is, the difference is the DBA does not adequately measure the low-range sounds. The rhythmic beat of the drums that are going to happen every time you have a loud performance there. The guitars, the loud bass guitars. I mean, my wife goes to a concert with me and she hates it because she can't hear the singing because she hears this loud thumping beats and the guitars. I go to a concert. I love it when I'm in the facility. I wouldn't love it if I hear it in my living room at night. And I wouldn't love it if I hear it in my living room at 90 decibel readings at night. It's like having a couple Harley Davidsons running through your living room. I was trying to think of how can I describe that difference here. And the thought comes to mind, it's sort of like the temperature in the wintertime. You look at your thermometer and see it says 32 degrees, not too bad out. But you go outside and you don't know the wind chill. The wind chill makes it down to 0 degrees because it's a blustery winter day in Michigan. It's sort of that. The DBA just does not give the picture of the low-range sounds that we're going to hear from this amphitheater, and that needs to be remedied. Now, we've heard, the concept plans of buildings in between the amphitheater and the Plaza Tower, and that might serve as a sound barrier. But those are just concept plans. We don't know when they'll be built. We don't know if they'll be built. We don't know the location and the design. So we would request that you include a requirement in the design approval that there be a sound mitigation barrier included at the northeast side, or to protect the properties to the northeast side, just like Soundscape requested. And I see I'm at 3 minutes. Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to make public comment on the case? Not you. You're not public. Okay. Thank you. Now I'll invite you up to share your thoughts.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring back to the forefront that in 2023, the Planning Commission, as part of your initial approval, asked the applicant to continue to work with staff, which we have over the last year. We've produced 2 reports, and we're working on our final report. Our sound consultant for the design team has been working closely with the sound consultant for the city to mitigate the concerns that have been raised. And we do have our final report that will be coming in October. That is the culmination of all the actions that we've taken place with staff, as well as the applicant to assist in reducing and mitigating sound. So I just wanted to remind the commission of that. Thank you.
Director Trickelson, do you want to share anything that's gone on behind the scenes with the city in terms of developing the plans?
Yeah, I don't want to confuse the deliberation. Your scope of authority is centered around final site plan review for building elevations and materials based on your 2023 resolution to approve the amphitheater. But part of that 2023 decision was to ask that the applicant continue to work with city staff around the noise. Sound study was provided, and through there have been reports provided along the way that the city's noise consultant has provided feedback, so it is an ongoing discussion. But that noise matter was the Planning Commission decided that the noise study and subsequent work was to be done by the planning director.
Thank you. Okay, commissioners. Deliberation on site plan review.
I appreciate the presentation, and especially going back and forth in that model to help us get different perspectives of how people will experience this. I'm comfortable generally with the materials and treatments that have been presented today. I am curious about what is possible to condition on that back, like, for if future development doesn't come to fruition on that back of house, like, what would that even look like in terms of a condition? Or
When you say back of house, you mean that south elevation?
Yes, so the metal screen wall that we're seeing on that whole back side, I completely understand why you wouldn't want to invest a bunch of money in that if it's immediately going to be covered up by new development. But if that doesn't happen, then that is pretty visible for folks coming from that direction.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you, Commissioner Joseph, is you are expressing some discomfort with the elevation and are looking for some mitigation potentially if there isn't to be development in that space in the near immediate future. Is that correct?
Yeah, within a
Okay.
reasonable amount of time, I guess.
Rowan, I'm going to put you on the spot here just for a moment. The site construction or LUD's permit with the, for that particular space of this development has not been final approval yet. Is that correct, with land, meaning around the landscaping specifically? Correct. Okay, that was my recollection too. So if I can get to, is this mine? Okay. I don't know that this is the best image here, but let me see if I have an overall site plan. I think that was the first image. Sorry, I went the wrong way. Oh, there we go. Okay, so on the left side of the screen, where the dark gray is, that is the wall that we are talking about that lacks some, I think, articulation is what I've just heard you say, that it was a corrugated metal. All of the land that is shown to the south, so where the truck loading docks are, and specifically the surface parking lot, those areas have not received final approval through city staff because there is a period of transition right now where there is some uncertainty. I don't know if that's a fair word, Bill, but there is some uncertainty as to whether or not the parking deck will advance, although it's certainly expected. Is that a fair description?
That's a fair statement, yeah.
Okay, yeah. And so we held off on requiring final designs specifically for that surface parking lot until we had more information around the parking deck. So all that to say is there is still some opportunity to look at the design of that space and perhaps even some additional landscaping that could be considered along the northern edge of that of what could be a surface parking lot, should the parking deck not move forward in a more immediate time frame. There is, of course, the design choices, whether there's different material choices that could be considered to provide a greater variation or articulation. We've used public art in the past as well. So the Planning Commission could look at some sort of, I guess, time period to say, should a parking deck not move forward within a period of 12 months, that we look at what sort of some changes to whether it's art or installation of landscaping. That's sort of an off-the-cuff, I guess, solution. I'm not saying we should probably vet that a little bit further before that would be incorporated into any sort of motion, but I think that there are some considerations that the Planning Commission could look to city staff to facilitate an immediate short-term solution depending on how the space is reconstructed or redeveloped. So I think I'd need to know whether, landscaping would be sufficient or whether you'd be looking at a change in materials, in which case that could come back to you, or you could have the planning department work with the architect to find a solution that provides greater variation or articulation.
I guess I would ask my fellow commissioners what their opinions are about that.
Yeah, I would agree with the comment. I think the arena, the Van Andel Arena, is a good example of, it's a very similar look and feel to my mind as the back of the Van Andel Arena. I honestly, the first thing that came to mind for me was the fencing along the street being that same material. The Van Andel doesn't bother me as much because you're walking far away from that wall, and there's wrought iron fencing that's, allows you to see through. This fencing along the street feels like that feels a little bit like a prison. Well, maybe that's I shouldn't say that. But that feel on the street is something I don't know that would be welcoming to walk along. So I was focusing actually more on just that fencing in the back of the house area and whether that could be something better. But I would love the idea of trying to put art up on that wall. I don't know that you can landscape and get rid of that 30-foot tall wall back there. I don't think that's going to happen. So something along the line, it would be nice to have, like, again, going back to the arena, if we knew what we knew then, or now then, right, that it was going to be there for 20 years like that, more, and now there's, doesn't seem to be any plan to continue that arena around the south side. It would have been nice to have something that just looks a little bit more like a building than a big blank corrugated wall. So my focus was on the fencing at the street level, actually, and whether that could be changed out to something that was more pedestrian friendly. But I would be also, I don't know what tools they are. I understand too, not wanting to put something expensive up there if it's going to be covered up or gone soon, but artwork that could then be removed and relocated somewhere else, something along those lines, seems like a reasonable solution.
And are you talking specifically about the fencing that is parallel to Market Avenue?
Correct, yes. So where the truck entrance is on either side of that is that same corrugated fencing. It feels like a wrought iron or something more similar to what's down the road at the promenade area would be more appropriate there. I know it gives you this view into the back of the house area, but candidly, when I walk around the Van Andel Arena, I sort of wonder, am I going to see a music play, a musician walking out of their bus or something? It's kind of interesting, actually, to look at back of house for me. I don't mind the trucks and things, but that, I don't know, as a pedestrian, if you're walking along there, if that fencing gives that same, if that feels nice to walk along, or it just feels a little bit monolithic to me. I think overall, other than those comments, overall, I would agree. I like the material selections are great. I think this came up during the review of the soccer stadium as well. It feels, I don't know, it's frustrating to me sometimes that we review these very small projects, some of which are upcoming here today, and we nitpick fine details, and yet here we, just because of the scale of it, we have to glaze over those things, and so we don't get a chance to even look at those details. I think the comment was brought up a few meetings ago by another commissioner of how, we talk about, a dentistry facility in Easttown, that whether or not the blinds are going to be up or down, and yet here we kind of glance over hundreds of feet of wall without really being able to talk about it. And I don't know how to fix that, but it does feel like we scrutinize very small developments much differently than we do these large ones. And some of it's the nature of the use, right? Their zoning code was not written and designed to handle this type of use, and I understand that. So I don't think that means anything other than just how do we think about how we approach small projects and large projects and do both fairly.
So there are certainly some opportunities to look at whether there's the use of public art, either along the fence or along that back side wall, rear wall. Also, we could look at the, maybe having a little bit more variation in the orientation of the corrugation, perhaps even some variation in color. I think that there's a church up in Monroe North that has a corrugated siding, and they have 3 or 4 different colors that are used, and so that's so there are definitely options within the corrugation if the Planning Commission wishes to have some mitigation for the monolithic color and orientation of that south wall and fence.
Any thoughts on the facade variation and transparency?
I don't have concerns with the transparency variation. I think this view here from Market, the main, what did you call it, the promenade? This more commercial area, office space than food and beverage area. Yeah, plaza, yeah. I think there's an appropriate amount of transparency and variation in materials. I think it was Commissioner Yonker that asked about the view from the river and what the experience is like there. I'm curious because just reviewing our standards and looking at how this allows for more interaction with the Grand River and visibility and things like that. Should I understand this as an improvement because it is actually allowing for access to the river by leaving an easement, like city-owned property, where right now you can't access the river here, right? You cannot walk along the river on this property. This provides some public space, but on the site plan, it's outside of the scope of work. So while it shows some grand steps down to the water and some other variation in the landscaping, is that even a consideration of ours? And can we say that it helps actualize the goals of the GR Forward and Grand River Action Plan or not? I think yes, because it does open up the opportunity for that, but I'm not sure that it does directly in terms of our site plan review here today, because it's not part of what we're approving. You know, it opens up that opportunity, but
So I think those river plans, I think, are fairly consistent with what was represented in the renderings today. That is a city project, public project, and they've incorporated the designs. If they're not exactly the same, they're very similar to what has been prepared by the city. So I think you can be confident that the design of the riverfront is what you're seeing today, which is why that orientation towards the riverfront and that connection is really critical and under your purview.
right. So it does enhance neighborhood access to the river by opening up that space for
Yes.
public access.
I would say yes, because
But in terms of the stress-free pedestrian experience, we're hopeful, but that's not a guarantee with the approval of this site plan, because it's, while connected, it is a separate project undertaken by the city and not by the developer.
that, yes, you're right. They are separate projects, but they are all being planned collaboratively.
Sure.
Yep.
To go back to the question about the large walls, kind of how that feels walking in, I suppose I'm less interested in the experience once you're into the gates than I am walking past the property along the river. I do think that with the changes in elevation and the proposed landscaping and things like that, I do think that it's broken up enough that it won't feel like such a barrier, like such a tall concrete wall. I'm less concerned about that. I do think once you enter, it might feel a little barren and, I don't know, like some of our 1960s and 70s developments, but I think from the exterior, I'm not as concerned about it. I think it'll be appropriate. Just go back to this fence as well. I almost prefer this with some additional landscaping here, maybe some larger vegetation or some variation in color versus going with the fence that you see through. I also love trying to see who's walking around in the parking lot behind Van Andel, but this feels like a situation where they're going to pull that bus right up in there and not wander around in the back of house parking lot. So I guess I'd prefer it the way it is, and I'm not as concerned about that south-facing wall right now, partially because of the proposed landscaping there, and I think there's a different experience, at least at this point. I don't know, I can't say in 5 years what might be there, but right now, behind Van Andel Arena, there is still a large chunk of the city. There are people back there, restaurants, new buildings, things like that. I think it's a different experience there than what the current situation is south of this, where it's pretty barren and ripe for redevelopment. So I trust that something will happen there that will help mitigate this large blank wall.
I would just say I agree with the perspective that it's really more about the sidewalk experience than the wall itself.
Yeah, I agree, and I, too, would prefer a more robust landscaping solution rather than kind of having a see-through material here. I know that's a matter of opinion, and if Commissioner Swim is here, he'd tell us not to design from the dais, but yeah, I do think maybe larger vegetation would help break that up for the pedestrian experience.
Along the market frontage you're speaking of?
Correct.
And specifically by the back
Specifically,
of house
yes.
stretch, because I think it, as laid out to us, I think further to the north, it's very appropriate. The heights of landscaping, what's proposed, the visibility into the public space, all makes sense to me.
Agree. Anything else?
I'll make a motion. Okay, now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the request of Grand Action Foundation 2.0 for final site plan review of the building design and materials of a plus or minus 12,000 seat outdoor amphitheater at 201, 225, 233, and 301 Market Ave Southwest for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance because the proposed use will help actualize several of the goals of the GR4 downtown and riverfront action plan, including Goal 1.4, enhance neighborhood access to the river, Goal 3.1, provide a stress-free pedestrian experience for all ages and abilities, promote placemaking by ensuring that the architecture reflects the city's commitment to high quality and enduring character, support the purpose of the Grand River Overlay District to enhance the extent to which people can view, access, and enjoy the riverfront by providing opportunities for view sheds, easements, and recreational opportunities. The site is designed to comply with all provisions of the zoning ordinance because building heights are configured to provide views of the Grand River while allowing an appropriate development intensity. The building elements include high-quality building materials, appropriate facade variation, clearly identified entrances facing both the street and the river, and design that distinguishes the base from the remainder of the building to enhance the pedestrian environment. Transparency is incorporated into the building design to the extent feasible and encourages and complements pedestrian scale activity. The architectural lighting will not cause off-site glare or light pollution. The proposed site will be developed so as not to impede the normal and orderly development or improvement of surrounding property for uses permitted by this chapter because the project is within the applicable height requirement for the Grand River Overlay District. The proposed building design and high-quality materials meet the characteristics important for civic buildings in the city's center zone district. All elements of the site design are harmoniously and efficiently organized in relation to topography, the size and type of lot, character of the neighborhood and adjoining property, and the type, size, and proportions of buildings because the buildings, structures, and entrances, including fencing and screening, are oriented, sited, and architecturally designed in a manner appropriate for this site. Visibility and accessibility to the Grand River is increased and enhanced by the proposed architectural design. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. That the conditions of approval from June 22, 2023 shall remain in effect. That the application and plans submitted by the applicant and signed, dated, and stamped by the planning director shall constitute the approved plans, except if plan elements do not meet ordinance requirements and/or as amended in this resolution. Number 3, that the architectural lighting to be used in association with the translucent glazing may change in color but shall not or shall not appear to scroll, travel, flash, undulate, pulse, blink, or make other similar movement. That the proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all state laws. Do we want to add anything about
Yeah, I
landscaping?
tried to draft a sample based on what I heard, that a revised landscape plan for the area along Market Avenue adjacent the back of house loading area be submitted to assist in mitigating for the solid metal fence. Landscaping shall include varying height trees and shrubs.
All right, I'd like to incorporate that as condition number 5. I wasn't as concerned about the riverside. I think the decorative gating is different than this. And then condition number 6, that this approval shall take effect after the date of the Planning Commission's decision.
Support.
Kyle made the motion, Laurel supported.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
Can I have a seat for just a second? The next item on the agenda is a request for 600 Bridge Street Northwest. You might recall seeing this back on June 13th, at which time the Planning Commission approved a special land use request for a new bar and restaurant with alcohol service operating past midnight, as well as an associated parking reduction. The applicant is now requesting to amend the approval to include outdoor seating with alcohol service, as well as a full parking waiver. This is before you today because outdoor seating in a side or rear yard located within 300 feet of a residential use requires special land use approval. The property is at the corner of Bridge and Seward. It was formerly a real estate office on the ground floor, and the bar and restaurant will occupy the ground floor, and upstairs is an apartment. You can see in the back in this aerial photo that there's a small parking lot, and that is the area proposed for this outdoor seating. Here's a Google Street View image showing that parking lot. So when approved by the Planning Commission, there was a partial parking waiver, and it took into account the 3 parking spaces on the property. And the applicant is proposing to use that lot now for outdoor seating. The orientation of the slide that I'm showing now, north is to the left. We've got Bridge Street on the left side and then Seward at the top. So this is the area in question. And the applicant is proposing to have seating for about 40 occupants. They'll be putting a new concrete slab down, as well as 2 pergolas. And I think at this time, details of those pergolas have not been determined, and I'll defer to the applicant to talk about that in any additional detail. But suffice it to say, they are proposing some kind of open, covered area for the outdoor seating. Also proposed is a new cooler and a refuse and recycling area that will be separated from the seating area by a wooden fence, an 8-foot fence at the cooler, so the cooler's fully screened, and then going down to 6 feet for the remainder. A portion of the site will not be fenced in. That is to facilitate some deliveries. And I'll defer to the applicant to talk about that in greater detail if anything needs to be added. There will also be open fencing along the street at Seward here and landscaping. Let's see. The approved hours of operation for the indoor use was up to 2 a.m. daily. The applicant is proposing outdoor operation hours until 11 PM Sunday through Thursday and midnight Friday and Saturday. The proposed outdoor hours of operation are consistent with other hours of operation of uses in the area or other establishments in the area. No outdoor live entertainment is proposed. Relative to parking, for the outdoor use, no parking is required in the TCC zone district. So the outdoor seating for up to 40 people is not adding a parking requirement. However, three of the required parking spaces are going to be eliminated with this proposal. So that is the other element under consideration today. The applicant has done some outreach to surrounding businesses, the West Grand Neighborhood Association, as well as John Ball area neighbors. We have not received any written comments regarding this application. So in sum, we're looking at outdoor seating at 600 Bridge in association with a new bar and grill. The outdoor seating would be open until 11 a.m. weekdays and then Friday and Saturday until midnight. We're also looking at the appropriateness of a parking waiver of the 3 parking spaces, considering the availability of on-street parking and alternative modes of transportation. Do you have any questions for me, or shall I turn it over to the applicant? We'll turn it over to the applicant. Okay.
All right, after the amphitheater, I feel like this is going to be real simple. Oh, sorry. I'm Rob Wall. I'm the owner of the property. Just like inside, okay, let's go outside. The reason we want it, it's pretty simple. In Michigan, I think more than anybody in the United States, we're trying to squeeze that little bit of nice weather out of our year, right? That's why we want it. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. Inside, the plan is to, good food, good service, good drinks, goodwill. That's kind of our motto. We're just trying to do that outside as long as we can for the year. Yeah, I would like to leave that alleyway kind of not fenced in at first, if possible, just because I don't know how it's going to be. I see how it's already being delivered to at the business next door. It doesn't seem to be a problem. Yeah, I guess the whole thing is just like even like the amphitheater or even the soccer stadium is definitely a thing where you just want to go in and get a dog, have a drink before the game or after and enjoy yourself and enjoy the weather. Right now, this season, I don't even think we were planning on the pergola because us being so close to winter now, it's probably going to be a spring thing. I don't know if that's the money's smartest put out there right now, but if you do need something for that, we can provide it. And yeah, it's pretty simple.
Could you explain a little bit about the cooler? Is that going to make noise or anything?
No, it shouldn't make a lot of noise, if any at all. More than like a general, like your air conditioner, outdoor air conditioning unit kicking on and off, essentially.
Just a question from me. I'm a little confused. Is the parking lot right now, the existing parking lot, is where the proposed outdoor seating is? So that parking lot is going away permanently, or are we just saying you're putting tables and chairs out there?
Yeah, that parking lot is going away permanently. I mean, even today I was parked on the other side of that alleyway. It would be a lot prettier with that patio back there. Those parking spots are definitely going to be a lot more useful for business and the beautification of the area.
I wouldn't say on an audio recording that you're parking in that alley, but,
Oh, no, there's a spot right over here. You can't see it.
okay, perfect. But yes, okay, I get it now.
I have a couple questions for you, and your architect might want to answer as well. It looks like the proposed fence is going up to 8 feet in height along the street. Why is that necessary?
8 foot is along the cooler area and the trash area.
Okay, so along the property line adjacent the street, the fence is 6 foot tall? 3 foot tall? What am I missing?
Greg Metz, Lot 3 Metz Architecture. The wood fence is,
You can use this as a pointer right here. Move that around.
follow the hand. The wood fence is right where the hand's going,
Okay,
and that's we were told that we had to totally block the cooler, so that's why that's 8 feet, so it totally blocks it. And then we reduced it to 6 feet because 8 feet's pretty tall.
okay.
And we're just trying to get it a little bit more human scaled. And then the wrought iron fence, follow the hand, is there, and that's 3 feet.
Oops, my apologies, I misunderstood
I'm
that.
glad we could clarify.
And then it looks like the landscape bed that you're creating, which I like, is going to be 4 feet in width, approximately 1 foot on private property, or 2 feet on private property, 2 feet into the public right-of-way.
Yeah, right now, where the landscape, so the top edge, that's where the sidewalk is today. So I just thought, hey, let's just go right to the sidewalk instead of just keeping it whatever it is.
Okay.
It's asphalt right now, so I'm just taking that asphalt. To leave 2 feet of asphalt there seems weird.
Okay. Do we know what the distance will be between the street tree planter and your proposed planter? That's something we can work through, I'm assuming, during the permitting process, is to make sure that we have adequate, I want to make sure that that new planter, which again, I love,
Yep.
doesn't encroach into that 6-foot clearance that we need as a city.
Totally cool, and off the top of my head, I think we're good because it's the existing sidewalk, and if I remember, the existing sidewalk's 6 feet wide.
Otherwise, we could pull the
But
planter.
if I could work with staff saying, hey, we have to move it 6 inches, could, staff say, cool.
Yeah.
We would, yeah, for sure. I don't want to encroach upon the 6 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Just one last question. So related to the refuse and recycling area, all of that will be contained in an enclosure, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, but with all the other fencing and stuff you have going on, I just want to make sure that trucks will be able to get in and out of there to deal with that.
Well, I used to be a delivery driver, so I've definitely taken that into
Okay,
account.
awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, thank you. We'll open up the public hearing for anyone who would like to comment on this case. Make your way up to the microphone. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and turn to deliberation.
I don't have a problem with this. I think per our discussion for the original approval, parking in this area is available on street, in public lots, elsewhere. There's already a lot of foot traffic here. People walk from their homes, their apartments, whatever it might be, and so I'm not concerned about waiving parking requirements here. And outdoor seating's great. I appreciate the clarification on the wood fence. That wasn't clear to me from that side elevation where that was, but seeing it on the site plan makes a lot of sense. And I think as long as we can condition that the sidewalk is wide enough there with the new landscape area, I think it's all good and appropriate.
Yeah, I completely agree. In addition to parking being available and lots of foot traffic. We also have good transit here and micromobility options for folks, which I think I, again, pointed out in the initial hearing of the special land use. And the outdoor seating is, the hours are consistent, or would be consistent with what's already in the area, and small enough scale that I don't think it'll be negatively impacting surrounding residential. I'm happy to make a motion unless you want to make it again. You want to do two in a row?
I just want to say I'm in support as well, and I would just note, both from a parking and hours perspective, this is in the TCC zone district, and sometimes we, I think, lose track of which zone district we're in. This is in the TCC, and I think this use and the situation is appropriate.
Anything else? Okay. Take off my glasses here. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the special land use and site plan review request of Bridge Street Bar LLC Rob Wall to establish outdoor seating with alcohol service associated with a new bar and restaurant and a parking waiver at 600 Bridge Street Northwest for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the proposed use will support the vitality of the local economy by encouraging investment, diversifying the economic base, and expanding employment opportunities, and support development of a compact walkable commercial center that provides a mix of uses located on a transit route. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of section 5.12.08.e because the outdoor seating area will be located to not impede the normal and orderly development of surrounding property. The patio is designed to respect the arrangement of public common ways for vehicle, bicycle, and pedestrian circulation. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because the proposed outdoor hours of operation are similar to other establishments in the area. Potential adverse effects arising from the proposed use will be minimized because adequate district and on-street parking is available in the area to support the use, and the aluminum fence and landscape buffer will enhance the public right-of-way on Seward Avenue. The proposed use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare by reason of noise, odors, glare, or visual clutter, because no outdoor live entertainment is proposed, and the use will be enclosed within a fenced and landscaped area. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment, because the fence and landscaping will reestablish the urban street wall along Seward Avenue. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability or economic welfare of the city because the use is not anticipated to result in nuisances that require excessive code enforcement actions, and the proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all state laws. Given the character, location, development trends, and other aspects of the neighborhood, the proposed location for alcohol sales will demonstrably be an asset to the neighborhood because there's demand for this type of use in the neighborhood, and the use will contribute to an already vibrant commercial district. The use or change in use as constructed and operated by the applicant is compatible with the neighborhood because the scale of the operation is compatible with other uses in the area, and the proposed outdoor hours of operation are consistent with other establishments in the vicinity. The use as proposed to be operated by the applicant will minimize or eliminate negative secondary effects on the neighborhood because an alcohol management plan will be in place. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard conditions at A, approvals as shown on the screen, that the application and plans submitted by the applicant and signed, dated, and stamped by the planning director shall constitute the approved plans except if plan elements do not meet ordinance requirements and are as amended in this resolution. That the use shall operate according to the application and per testimony as recorded in the Planning Commission minutes. That this approval does not include any proposed signs, and any future signs shall be subject to the requirements of Article 15 of the ordinance and permits received prior to installation. That a land use development services, LEDs permit, building permit, and all other required permits be obtained from the City of Grand Rapids prior to construction, demolition, or operation. That any expansion of the approved special land use requires an additional special land use review and approval by the Planning Commission. That the proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all state laws. And that this approval shall take effect 16 calendar days after the date of the Planning Commission's decision. 2, that outdoor hours of operation will be no later than 11 p.m. Sunday through Thursday and midnight Friday and Saturday. 3, that any music or outdoor amplified sound shall not be heard above the ambient noise of the surrounding area and comply with the City of Grand Rapids noise ordinance. That this approval does not include outdoor live entertainment. And then, was there nothing else? Okay, that's it.
Support.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. No nose ordinance.
I know, maybe we need a nose.
The next item on the agenda is something that you might recall, for those of you that were here on July 11th. The Planning Commission considered this request at that time, but did not make a decision, and because additional information was needed about all the uses on the property, landscaping details, and parking. So we did renotice this. A public hearing was never opened, so this is essentially starting anew. And we do have the applicant here to address any questions that I won't be able to. So the AT&T is requesting approval for outdoor storage of equipment and supplies for remote telecommunications repair services. And this is before you today because equipment and material storage requires special land use approval in the SDIT, Industrial Transportation Zone District. The property is in the SDIT. It's here in green. It's adjacent to SDIT to the east and south. We have MDR to the north, which is a cemetery. And then to the west and southwest is the city of Wyoming. And we have other industrial uses nearby. I'd like to point out that the road configuration is slightly different than what is seen in this aerial photo. The city has, subsequent to this photo being taken, the city removed this sort of cut through, and it's now a landscaped area. So in the past, you could drive, you could drive and on this little cut through and turn right, and now you go straight all the way to Eastern. So all that's now landscaped. And as you can see, the applicant has a significant amount of green space and some landscaping. And it's this green space at the corner of Eastern and 36 that's mostly under question. The slide before you on the screen shows all the area that will be removed for the installation of this outdoor storage area. And I think this plan, well, this is the tree protection plan. Let's see here. I think the landscape plan is illustrative. This shows the new cable yard that's being proposed. There are new trees to be planted and a range of trees and other landscaping along the eastern side as well as the 36th Street side. The site is currently, it's about 10 acres, and there is a chain link fence around the western portion of the property. It's a 6-foot-high black vinyl coated chain link fence, and that was installed a couple of months ago, and that was administratively approved. I'll let you folks talk about the landscaping. This is the Alpine site. I'll let you folks talk about that as well. This is the proposed site plan, and one of the issues last time was some confusion about landscaping, how many, the parking demand on the site relative to the existing uses and the existing storage on the site. So I'll talk about some of those things, and I'll let the applicant fill in some details. So currently, the property is used as office, training facility, parking for employee vehicles, service vans, bucket trucks, fleet repair garage, and storage of equipment and reels for remote telecommunication work. And although the entire property is utilized by AT&T, it is used by several discrete business units doing different things on the site. And the new proposed storage yard will be used by the construction and engineering business unit. So that's what's in red on the site. And the existing outdoor storage area, which you can see here as a parking lot. I'll go back to the aerial photo. The existing storage on the east side of the property is used by a different unit, the customer-facing operations unit. So those two storage areas cannot mix. They need to be separate. So you can see on this aerial photo, there's storage within that parking area. And you can see different things along the lot line, and then you can see various kinds of service vehicles parked there. So all of that, we're considering there, a storage area. So none of the new storage area will be used for parking or vehicular traffic. It will be strictly for storage of materials. I do want to mention that this plan has been reviewed by our stormwater project engineer, who has given it approval. It meets all stormwater requirements. I do want to mention tree canopy and green space. This plan will meet that. But one of the things that the Planning Commission should consider today is not only if this front yard parking or front yard storage area is appropriate in that location, as well as whether the proposed screening is adequate. So those are two things that are integral to this consideration today. The Planning Commission also, in consideration of this outdoor storage, should be considering whether the this front yard location would be a detriment to any surrounding properties. The applicant has shown us a site circulation plan, and there is a loading dock on the east side of the main building on the site, and trucks would exit the site going north through one of the existing storage area, and then exit out to the other side of the site. Relative to parking, that was a significant topic of consideration. Last time this was before you, and so the applicant has provided an exhibit and information in the packet to better express the range of parking needs on the property. They've got fleet parking. These are service vehicles. They've got this office, training, and supply parking. There's parking for this building B. And here's parking for building A. So they did do a parking calculation, and basically they're within the 120% of the required amount of parking. So even though we, to us, it looked like quite a bit of parking on site, the applicant was able to show that the proposed amount of parking is something that they need to support their operations. And I'm sure they'll be happy to answer any questions about that. So in sum, we're looking at outdoor storage in the front yard of this property, the adequacy of landscaping and screening relative to this front yard storage, and whether this use in this location would have any detriment to surrounding properties. Do you have any questions for me?
Any questions for Elizabeth? Okay, thank you.
You can feel free to move about, but I'll also try to follow what you're saying. And
Okay.
I'll move the slides for you.
Okay, great. Hello, John Hood with EXP, client manager for AT&T. We do all their work in the state of Michigan. I have Don Duggar here. He's a project architect for this project, and Melanie Hagel, client manager for, manager for this project for AT&T for this area. So basically what we have, I think you saw a lot of it going on there. So they were located in Comstock Park, and tornado-like winds last year pretty much damaged their building, and they were forced to relocate. That was a leasehold building, so they're trying to move into one of their own properties, and this site kind of is conducive to all of those uses with the same type of things. You can see there's storage already at the east side, so they're trying to continue. That would be over here. And they're trying to continue the same use here there's also a fleet garage there, so some of the operation there is consistent with what was happening at Comstock Park. So they would like to move in, and the need here, though, is still to put a cable yard, and I think this is what the area is, as was described. Basically, there will be gravel put down, drainable, and they would be mostly storing cable. You've probably seen them, big 5-6 foot cable wheels, 5-6 feet tall, with some equipment in a loop where they would probably, service it with fork trucks and load up and then pull out. A lot of the people that work here and in that operation, they drive their own vehicles, and they store a lot of these vehicles on site. So they come to the site, they come to work, they get out of their car, leave it in the lot, and then they go into these trucks. So you got kind of a double parking going on with some of these employees. I think there was some questions last time about the parking area, the necessity of it, and I think hopefully we presented this to show how many spaces are really needed, and this was kind of an answer to those questions. So I think, is there anything else that you want to describe about the project? I think that's it in a nutshell. So we are looking to do that. This is being asked of us, obviously, for the setback requirements and putting a storage yard in a front yard. So hopefully with the reduction in the landscaping that we addressed and the removal of the road there, it's kind of created another buffer there that we're asking for approval. So, any questions?
Can you talk about your landscaping plans for those areas that don't currently have the big trees at the front?
Like,
Yeah, so you're going to maintain the trees that are there,
Yep.
I understand, and then Yeah, talk about the screening efforts.
These
and-
here?
Yeah, and on the south side, please.
These here?
The new
the new things, okay.
landscaping, yes.
All right, we have, do you have the land, why don't you talk? Can you talk about that, Don?
Don Duggar with EXP. So the proposed plan is to add various pines and junipers along those spaces there to provide screening. We have some elevations as presentation for what it would look along the Eastern Avenue initially, and then within 5 years of growth, also along 36th Street. The planning's there, and along with 5 years' worth of growth. The existing chain link fence would remain in place.
That pretty much does
That's-
the new plantings.
That's the new plantings, yes.
Okay.
Do you maintain your own landscaping, or do you outsource that?
Hi, I'm Melanie Hager with AT&T. We have a property management that AT&T outsources their property management to CBRE. They do the maintenance of all the landscaping inside the buildings, janitorial services, all of that.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll open up the public hearing for anyone who would like to comment on this case. Make your way up to the microphone. And Emily. And we'll close the public hearing and turn to deliberation.
So I did obviously have the minutes from the last time, but I wasn't here for that discussion. I didn't know if anybody who wanted to provide more insight to that.
My memory serves, last time we had this conversation, a couple things were going on. One was we were quite pressed for time, which I felt was a little bit unfair to the applicant, frankly, and probably rushed through a few things because of that. However, there was also missing some detail around the landscaping screening. There was a berm at one point called out, and there wasn't any detail about, height or any sort of scale of that. So, and then we did talk a lot about the parking and whether the parking was really required or if, there was extra space that could be utilized instead of this grass space. That's my memory of that discussion, and after briefly reading through the minutes ahead of this. I will say, for me, I'm not super excited about front yard storage here, frankly. However, this is an area that is, fairly industrial in nature, and it's it's a number of employees in the city of Grand Rapids that I would hate to see leave the city for a more opportune site somewhere else. So I would say for me in this particular application, I think I can get behind it. I would probably like to talk through the landscaping plantings a bit, and I would like to see something more robust and more in line with what is existing along that line of trees. And I don't know what we can do from that respect as far as requiring more mature plantings or additional plantings. But I think I can get behind this because of the nature of the use, and the rest of 36th Street and Eastern is sort of this quasi-industrial space. It's a little bit of a struggle, but I think I can get behind it if we can talk about potentially sort of putting that landscaping on steroids a little bit and see if we can do a little better job of screening, particularly along Eastern Avenue, where that large lawn is currently visible. Do a better job of really just full out blocking it.
I would agree with that. My initial concern was when I saw the image of just some arborvitae being planted there along 36th Street. It was not robust enough, and so maybe some more mature plantings, the white pines or so on, or even some type of windscreen that would be incorporated into the chain link fencing that's going to go along the property's edge.
Yeah, I agree about both what the commissioners have said here in terms of adding more screening for sure for the pedestrian experience. Yeah, thanks for the added context related to last time. I too am not super excited about front yard storage, but in the context of this being an industrial district surrounded by other industrial uses and not right up against residential, I think I can be supportive, but definitely want to see. Could you go back to the rendering of that? Yeah. So in this rendering, we see the plantings, but there's no kind of illustration of what's behind that fence. And I know that most of us have seen kind of those big cable spools, and this doesn't seem adequate to screen that, especially when it used to just be lawn and open space for people to walk by. So, yeah, I would like to see more.
Presumably through the LUD's process, it would have to comply with the ordinance. How detailed do we want to be in this condition?
Well, I think there's two things. One is whether you find the use of the existing chain link fence appropriate. And then the second, looking at application of the landscape buffer requirements as a way to provide some additional landscaping beyond what is presented here and locate in areas between the public right-of-way and the cable yard where existing screening is not provided. So we could use that as a tool to provide some additional landscaping. Or the parking lot screening requirements or a combination thereof.
I, for one, am comfortable with the chain link fence.
Yeah, I mean, with additional landscaping, I think, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it's per linear feet. Elizabeth, this is MCN or MON? I'm sorry.
That's SDIT. So, let's see.
Yeah.
Adjacent property is MCN.
MCN, okay. So then it would be, for every 50 linear feet, it would be 3 trees and 15 shrubs. So if that's thought to be adequate, we could use that landscape buffer requirement. Otherwise, like I said, we could do a combination of parking lot screening as well as landscape buffering to try to find, I'm presuming the goal is to provide little to no visibility into the cable yard, if that's correct. So we could work on a revised landscape plan that meets that intent. Trying to find, Elizabeth, do you know the section where it talks about time of planting and the minimum expectations? Because there is the ability to require more mature plantings at time of planting as well.
Go down to G in buffer review, the very end of that section.
1112.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, that's not what I was hoping it would, not what I was remembering, but.
Okay, would someone like to make a motion?
Sure. I'm not sure where we stand on the plantings. I mean, I don't know if there's a specific section, Kristen, that we could reference that would, but, I mean, I'm thinking something along the lines of double what is shown here, right? 15 feet apart for the, I don't know what that bush is, but.
Well, I think the reference would presumably be the landscape buffer section of 51112, which is what we would maybe more commonly see between lower density residential and higher density residential. Seems to be a more common application of that section for the Planning Commission at least. And it does have very specific requirements about the mix of trees and the number of plants and shrubs for every 50 linear feet.
Maturity as well.
I'm not seeing anything specific about maturity in this section. Talks about making sure that in 2 years that they're thriving.
Mm-hmm.
I'll continue to look for this, whether the city has any, like at time of planting, that shrubs must be X feet in height. I thought that there was something in there. So you could look at maybe the buffer requirements in addition to what's being proposed.
If I make a motion, can you give me some language by the time I get there? All right, sounds great. Do we want to ask do we ask the applicant if they have any comments on what we've been discussing?
No, I think we're totally understanding that you basically wanted to increase the landscaping in the two particular areas, correct, here?
Yeah, the existing is fine. I think it's those two areas on 36 and Eastern where
Okay.
I'd like to see more robust plantings, yeah.
Got it.
Okay.
Can do that. Can provide-
I will make a motion. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the special land use and site plan review request of EXP US Services, Inc., Donald Duggar, for outdoor storage of equipment and supplies for remote telecommunication repair services at 3530 Eastern Avenue Southeast for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the proposed use will allow for reasonable use of an existing industrial zone property and will contribute to the balance of commercial, industrial, institutional, and transportation land uses compatible with adjacent uses. Number two, this proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of section 5.12.08E because the location of outdoor storage will allow for vehicle parking and circulation patterns that promote safe and efficient movement within the site. And adequate stormwater management measures will be employed. 3A, the proposed use will be compatible and harmonious and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because the proposed use will be consistent with the current industrial character of the neighborhood, and appropriate screening will be incorporated into the site, providing reasonable protection of adjacent land and public right-of-way. The proposed use will not have potentially adverse effects on the neighborhood because landscape screening will be provided to ensure the proposed use is adequately buffered from surrounding public and private property. The proposed use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare because excessive noise, glare, odor, or visual clutter is not anticipated, and access to the storage area is internal to the site and will not result in any traffic disturbance. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment because landscaping and screening will improve the street wall and enhancing the walkability of the public sidewalk. The proposed use will retain as many natural features of the landscape as practical because the minimum requirements for tree canopy and green space will be met, even with significant amount of green space to be removed, and stormwater management will be incorporated to mitigate any negative effects of the increased impervious area. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability or the economic welfare of the city because no additional burden is expected with the establishment of this use. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard conditions set A, approvals, maybe on the screen. And 2, that the outdoor storage area should be used for equipment and supplies as indicated in the application and testimony of the applicant and not for parking or vehicular storage. And 3,
apologies, we were working on your your condition. So there's the standard condition set A on the screen now. And the additional condition was that the landscape buffer requirements of section 51112 of the zoning ordinance be met for areas between the public right-of-way and the outdoor cable storage where existing natural screening is not provided. Landscape buffer requirements shall supplement the proposed landscape plan submitted by the applicant.
as Kristen said. So moved.
Support.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion passes.
And I just wanted to follow up related to this conversation, but I did find the minimum requirements at time of planting that are standard within the ordinance, hence it wasn't included in the motion, that there are minimum requirements at time of planting for trees and shrubs and soil volumes and such to ensure long-term viability of any landscaping that is. So it's already included in the ordinance, therefore I didn't add it to the condition. So we found it. Elizabeth found it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
And then we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll dive into the master plan at 2:56. let us continue.
All right, thank you for being able to circle back to this today. So as you may recall, as part of the adoption process, we really wanted to make sure that the Planning Commission was having the opportunity to engage with staff to thoroughly go through what the plan recommendations are. So unfortunately, at your last Planning Commission meeting, we were unable to get to this presentation, so we brought it back before you today because we do feel that it's really important. We, I think, maybe misjudged how long the last cases would take, so we were unable to get to it in a timely manner. So fortunately, Emily is here for the Michigan Association of Planning Conference, as we do have a presentation tomorrow morning on this at one of the sessions, and so she was here and we were able to reset. So since we only got about 10 minutes into the presentation, I do think it would just be helpful if we start over to be able to bring ourselves back to the content within the plan itself and be able to have a good deliberation, make sure we're still continuing to head in the right direction, that you're comfortable with the material. Also, we do have some slides outlining some of the public comment that we've received to date. Assuming that we continue to get public comment through the next few weeks, the next meeting, we will also provide you with an update on the comment. So that way, when we do get to the public hearing later in October, it's not the first time you're hearing about what the community feedback has been through the process, through this review public comment period. So with that, I will turn it over to Emily. Take it away.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Emily Hayes. I'm with Planning Inc. Next. I also have joining me today Jamie Granger from Interface. He is virtual and online and available to answer questions when we get to the area-specific plan portion of the presentation. His team led that process and is much more knowledgeable. So any questions about that portion of the presentation, I will kick over to him. So as was mentioned, we do have some material to review for the second half of the deep dive. So that's Chapter 5, Desirable Development Character, as well as the 3 area-specific plans that are intended to be adopted with the CMP for Cruston, Butterworth, and Southtown neighborhoods. We also have some slides on public comment update, essentially 1 slide per chapter area, so we can go through each of those to understand what the major themes are that are coming out of comment to date. All right, so as we've revisited this a few times now, but just a reminder what a community master plan is. You know, it's the blueprint for how our community grows and evolves, and that's important for it's necessary for a valid zoning ordinance. So that will be the next step. Much of what we'll talk about today is sort of the how and where the concepts in this plan actually are put into practice. We are at the tail end here of the CMP process and into sort of this extended adoption process, reviewing the draft plan. We have about 2 more weeks of the open public comment period, just for reference. We've looked at this plan framework a few times now, but we are going through the last of the community goal areas, which is desirable development character. The goal is a strong sense of place through high quality design. New development will improve or support the existing fabric of each neighborhood. So that is what we are intending to advance with the content that we're reviewing today. So Chapter 5 provides guidance on the physical development of Grand Rapids, and the components within that are the development principles, the conceptual development framework, future character and land use map, future character types that comprise that map, and then design guidelines that provide an additional qualitative look at the types of development that are occurring. The development principles describe the intent about how and where growth and development in Grand Rapids should occur. They provide additional guidance on a variety of themes around quality, appearance, pattern, and character of development. And they are supported by the future character map, which depicts the locations where certain concepts apply through the character types. So we did look at this last time, but I will pause again. We have 10 development principles broken up over 2 slides. The first 5 are shown here. We're looking at ensuring development that incorporates residents' need to maintain a safe, equitable, and healthy neighborhood, preserving and enhancing the uniqueness of neighborhoods, serving as stewards of the environment, providing desirable housing options at a broad range of styles, levels, and occupancy types, and then focusing on development that integrates a mix of uses, particularly at key locations to serve neighborhoods. The next 5 here talk about connecting those places, so neighborhoods connected to mixed-use districts, employment centers, and other activity centers, with opportunities to walk, bike, drive, and access public transit. A focus on cultivating community-based placemaking through infill and redevelopment that complements what the existing areas already hold. Fostering a downtown district with a vibrant mix of businesses, housing options, and entertainment and recreation amenities, featuring access to the river through strategic opportunities and preservation efforts, and through all of this, maintaining the city's financial health. So efficient use of infrastructure, strengthening employment centers, and expanding development incentives. So the next piece of this chapter is the conceptual development framework. This is a complement to the future character and land use map and illustrates where investment should be prioritized to support existing and possible future nodes of activity. We talk about nodes as places that have a mix and concentration of residential, commercial, and public uses, and they either currently or have the potential to be walkable and economically diverse and to provide safe and convenient access to shops, amenities, and services. Within this framework, nodes are connected and enhanced by significant corridors. Just to note on this map, the location and size of each node is diagrammatic. So it's intended to illustrate the relative development intensity, and the shaded circle around each node represents a quarter-mile radius from the edge, which is a typical sort of walking, biking capture area, wherein the impact of investment there would also be felt. So we have different types of nodes. Neighborhood nodes are central to residential neighborhoods or areas of business. Mixed use, primarily neighborhood serving. They allow for increased residential density within a short radius of the nodes. That's why we show that quarter-mile shaded area. Transit-oriented nodes are typically located along major transit routes. Again, they have intended to contain sort of a diverse mix of businesses, but have a more regional draw, potentially a wider capture area. Employment nodes are intended to encourage growth within areas that support regionally significant concentrations of non-retail employment, so that's institutional, office, and industrial centers. And as I mentioned last time, there is often some overlap, so there are other types of nodes that aren't called employment nodes, but hold significant employment opportunities within them. However, due to their location within the city, for example, along a transit route, they fall into a different classification. Neighborhoods of focus are shown hatched. These are the census tracts where residents experience the most disparate outcomes in income, educational opportunities, home ownership, and wealth accumulation compared to other census tracts and the city as a whole. The city already has a focus on these areas and policies that direct policies to eliminate inequities and by investing in those areas. And then significant corridors are important connectors along which safety and access for pedestrians, bicyclists, and other non-car modes should be prioritized. They are typically designated as crosstown connectors and neighborhood business streets in the Vital Streets Plan. And they connect residents to important places in the community, and increased residential density in those areas is encouraged.
Emily, is the number of nodes by design or by happenstance?
By happenstance. They came out through a process, sort of an iterative process, wherein we looked at all of the plans that Grand Rapids currently has adopted, and through a process with staff sort of identified what all of these locations might be, and then working with our transportation and economic development consultants found those areas where a more intentional look or investment priority there would have the greatest impact based on a number of factors. Anything else before I move on? All right. All right. So the next piece is the future character and land use map. We got through almost all of these last time, but I'm going to run through them again just to talk about where each of these character types is mapped within the city and what they are intended to do. Just a note that the character types, they describe attributes of urban form and function, including size and type of buildings, their relationship to the street, surrounding street and block pattern, parking and access, and land uses. So land use is one component, but it is intended to be a much broader description of what these areas are and could be. So for each of the character types, the map will kind of call out where within the city they are located. We have done our best to make this a forward-thinking, forward-looking map, but I am open very much to thoughts on how and where these are placed at the moment. Downtown is intended to promote a dense development pattern focused on the close proximity of services, diversity of uses, and dynamic building styles. And it is supported by a transportation network that supports a park once environment, so street grid pattern with short walkable blocks, much of what exists today, building and enhancing on that pattern. The Transitional Activity Center is intended to be just that, a transition from downtown into the surrounding areas. Provides a connection between downtown and the surrounding residential or commercial areas in intensity of the development pattern between those uses. This is mapped in limited places at the moment, and that's sort of a process of refining the boundaries of downtown, so there may be benefit in looking at this and its opportunity to be applied elsewhere.
Meaning additional places ringing around the downtown or elsewhere, like?
Ringing around the downtown.
Okay.
Yeah. Its intended purpose is to transition from downtown to elsewhere, so really anywhere along that edge could be appropriate.
And that's presumably a natural progression as the downtown grows. You got to keep pushing the transition further out.
Yeah, and I'll note that the downtown boundary currently reflects that of the DDA, and so there's sort of that existing boundary that we're following, and then these are the parcels that sort of create that transition between established areas outside downtown and the areas within that boundary. The Community Activities Center provides places to live, work, and shop around key intersections and along corridors that create well-connected, walkable places. You'll note that many of these currently include shopping centers, big box stores along major corridors that have the potential to redevelopment with more density and become less auto-oriented through incremental development and improved multimodal infrastructure. So we're calling these out as opportunities to sort of transition in nature. Neighborhood Center reinforces a pedestrian and transit-friendly environment in a compact area and promote a mix of small-scale retail, service, entertainment, civic, office, residential uses, and really enhance the vitality of the surrounding neighborhoods. So these are mapped to be directly accessible from nearby neighborhoods and encourage walking and bicycling and support the concept of a complete neighborhood. You'll notice that a lot of these follow what are now traditional business areas to strengthen that role. The compact neighborhood comprises much of the residential areas of the city. This character type is intended to create, maintain, and promote a variety of housing opportunities while enhancing the desired physical characteristics of the city's existing neighborhoods. From a land use perspective, this has a mix of housing, but also small office, commercial, religious, civic uses integrated, particularly along intersections and major streets. But there are opportunities to have a more widely dispersed mixed-use experience within these areas.
So I mentioned it last time, but I just want to make sure under building form, when it says small multifamily buildings, I think we should consider what that means or what people might think that means. Like especially if you look at the example in the bottom picture, like I don't know that people would consider that small. I mean, obviously compared to massive complexes or multi-building complexes potentially, but just so that we're setting an expectation that people won't then say, well, this said it was going to be small and this doesn't feel small.
Yes, I have a note to make sure that we align the imagery and the text in this, and I agree with you that that is probably not interpreted as small for many, and so being more.
Which I think is, I would not say that that is inappropriate for this.
Right.
Yes. So strike the small, really, is I guess
Yes.
my suggestion.
Understood. The majority of the remaining residential areas fall into the suburban neighborhood character type, which builds on the established development pattern, consisting predominantly of low-density residential development, with the intention to evolve these areas into more walkable neighborhoods with new housing types. The note on the mobility piece of this is that often these are the areas where you see cul-de-sacs or curvilinear streets, and while that form may follow in some regard, there's an emphasis on additional connections, particularly for people walking and bicycling in those areas.
I appreciate what you said about making new connections there. I also just want to highlight the fact that none of the suburban neighborhood designation is in any of our neighborhoods of focus, and I just want to make sure that folks, as a result of this plan, that folks that live in these areas or might want to move to these areas, don't have the expectation that there won't be change, that we need to make sure that we're putting new housing and services in all the neighborhoods. And so I don't know that anything needs to change on this page necessarily, but just acknowledging the fact that it's not just going to stay single family with cul-de-sacs in these areas.
And that is noted within this chapter that really all neighborhoods of Grand Rapids will experience some change, and these are intended to sort of guide that in a way that makes sense, but it's a well-taken point.
And maybe applicable to the compact neighborhood as well.
Yeah.
Because interestingly, the data shows that our density is actually higher in the suburban neighborhoods than in the modern.
Modern area.
Century.
Yes, overlap. The mid-century falls into compact, the modern area falls into suburban, and so there is density within both. The next is Innovation Center, which is intended to accommodate a broad range of flexible employment opportunities with a focus on active ground floor uses abutting public streets to promote more compact and walkable areas. These may include older industrial structures that have been adaptively reused or retrofitted to include small retail, commercial, or maker spaces. But where there are new buildings, there's an emphasis on active ground floor uses and the streetscape environment, as these are areas that are likely to transition from sort of their current uses to a broader mix. Next is manufacturing and logistics, and this is your sort of typical heavy industry areas. So primary uses would include manufacturing, research and development, warehousing, distribution, and similar uses. These are notably located along rail corridors or interstates, and the streets and sites sort of prioritize access for motor vehicle and truck traffic to support areas where those uses are appropriate. I will also note that you have an opportunity to provide additional comments after this, so if you need a minute with the map and there are specific things you'd like to call out, I am happy to hear them beyond just this discussion, because I know that it does take a minute to kind of take in where all of these have been mapped. The next is campus. Campus areas are often master planned and include a variety of sort of administrative, professional, educational, civic, religious, athletic, or recreational purposes. This has been mapped where multiple buildings are contained on a site. So you'll see this is really widespread at a variety of scales, but it is more about that function of multiple buildings on a site working together for the same sort of primary purpose. The internal street networks of these where they occur are intended to encourage walking and biking internally, and the description in the CMP notes that where these sites are located near transit routes and stops, a connection to those streets and stops should be prioritized.
Emily, I'm wondering if all of our public schools are included in this campus, and whether we should take a look at the GRPS plan, the facilities plan, and reconsider whether those properties that are being closed as schools should be in the campus district.
My read on this is that I think we could probably pare back where campus is currently mapped and have a lot of these uses fall within the larger character type. But I think we should probably go through that more specifically to be sure where.
Yeah, I think of, the school buildings, K through 12 generally, as well as religious institutions, since those also are can be large parcels that might serve as an appropriate residential development in the future.
Yeah, and
community services.
The religious institutions aspect of this is a conversation we have in a lot of places about where you sort of mark that threshold, what makes sense to be considered campus or held as campus moving forward, and what should be part of sort of the broader underlying area.
Yeah, what does this show right now?
Right now, it's just multiple buildings, and I think there may be a higher threshold to apply.
Okay.
I do sort of, this is future land use, right? Mm-hmm. So I do sort of wonder, because campus uses are generally very, very specific to the specific use that's happening there today. When a religious institution or a school or a university closes or relocates, I don't think it would be reasonable to believe that it will be a future campus use. So I don't know, from a best practices perspective in planning, I don't know what the answer is, but is it appropriate, like you said, to show those campus uses more as, in a future land use, as whatever is surrounding them, almost more so, right? I had a conversation the other day with someone about the bus garage that GRPS has right in Highland Park, and thinking, I don't see that changing anytime soon, but clearly if it does, we're not going to approve an industrial use there, probably, right? It would probably be redeveloped into something more congruent with the neighborhood around it. So I don't know. I just would ask that around the concept of future land use. If that's just because it's there today doesn't mean the future would hold that, especially when it's so specific.
Right. And the other thing to consider is that often the uses that are located on these campus sites are uses that are allowed essentially everywhere, if not everywhere. So things like open space and academic uses and civic uses, those are not restricted sort of in that next step of implementation to the degree that other things may be. And so I think there's an opportunity to sort of incorporate these sites into the surrounding character types.
Oh, I think Commissioner Younger and I were saying something very similar, that I'm not sure those individual sites, because they're currently used as an institutional use, should be categorized as campus, but rather look at what's happening around it.
Yeah, I mean, going back a couple slides, I was thinking about the comments about suburban and compact development, and even the idea of low-density residential. Honestly, I don't know that low-density residential is in the future of a city like ours. It is now, but how far forward do we really look, right, is the kind of the question.
Usually 20 years is
20 years, yeah.
And then zoning land use world, that
Yep.
you don't see mass change like that generally.
Yeah, right.
Right.
There.
And I think a case in point of what we're talking about is Kalamazoo and 28th, which is marked on this map as campus and is about to not be a campus anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this could be pretty significantly pared back, so we can work on how exactly that gets defined.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that one is it's a pure office use. It just happens to be a nonprofit, so we say it's a campus instead of office or commercial, right? Anyway, yeah.
Okay. All right. The last one, and the only character type we didn't cover last time, is parks and open space. And this is reflective of sort of the current layer of parks that is maintained by the city. So, this is intended to accommodate natural parks and park-like settings, preserve identified open space land and uses from development pressures. And, the primary element of this is going to be open space, but it's integrated throughout the city. It includes both passive open spaces and active park facilities and some school facilities as well. So this reflects essentially the parks layer maintained by the city. But again, open to how this may evolve.
Yeah, I've always wondered about this as it relates to specifically private golf courses that are not in any way of public use. And when I'm in another town and I'm in a hotel and I think I just want to go for a walk in a park and I look at my Google Maps and look for something green and you show up there and it's just it's all fenced and no one can go in, it feels always weird to me. So I don't know if this should be more limited to public use facilities. I mean, even public golf courses seem more appropriate to me than some of the private uses.
I think we're also probably missing some green along the river in front of the 201 Market site, especially in front of our publicly controlled land.
I will double check the data that informed some of that, and I think we can update that fairly easily.
It's probably because it's like currently moving through.
Or maybe a 50-foot green space buffer doesn't really show up on this scale.
Well, that's possible too, yeah.
Would you mind flipping back the shopping centers character?
Yep, sorry.
Yes. This. So it doesn't appear that on the west side, for example, that any are categorized this way. Are you able to show me where Koval and Lake Michigan Drive, for example, and then even further west on Lake Michigan Drive, you have a family fair, shopping center. I'm just curious what those are designated as, if they're neighborhood centers?
Yeah, it would be.
Seems.
Here, it's a little bit small. Yep, that would be neighborhood center.
Interesting.
Yes. And it's a good point about sort of the intention here that places transition, and I think those two or three, I guess, in particular, may be better suited to this character type.
And I'm not arguing that I want the future character to remain shopping center, but I think as they are now, they more closely represent this. So I'm just not sure the thought process behind that. They're obviously smaller than most of these areas that were designated in this way, and that's why I missed when they lit up. But
the fact that they're smaller is a part of why they ended up into that character type. Strictly size, but I could see that being validly applied in either scenario. So if there is a thought on that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about on this side, so 28th is a lot of this. And earlier today, yesterday, some of us were in presentations at the MAP conference talking about strategies to transition some of these corridors for more housing and so I guess part of that is on kind of housing next to make sure they're coordinating with y'all and aligning with this, but I guess I just want to make sure that maybe it's just more emphasis on redevelopment and new development and when we're talking through these. So it's not just commercial and neighborhood office and.
Yeah. And when, I know this was a while ago now, but when we went through the recommendations in some of the earlier chapters and we talked about redevelopment of auto-dominated corridors and some of the strategies around that, those recommendations reference community activity center as a location where those would be most appropriate. And so there is a link between some of those strategies and places where sort of strip corridor development dominates, and there's probably a need to transition to some smaller scale parcels and have those more intentional multimodal interventions to aid in that transition.
Okay, thanks.
Kind of related to that, I was looking at the neighborhood center distribution. It seems like this future map is perpetuating the long runs of TBA. And I sort of thought with the conceptual development framework with the nodes, we'd see a future land use map that more condensed them into those areas and then.
Yeah, and I think about them as sort of working in conjunction because there are some areas here where commercial or mixed-use development does dominate that corridor, and some of that may be appropriate, and future intensification should happen at those nodes as shown at the conceptual development framework. But there may be a need to revise the character types to eliminate between some of those nodes. I think that's a legitimate path forward there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
South Division's probably the most obvious one here. Might need some evaluation of what happens between the nodes and whether neighborhood center character type is the appropriate use type versus something different.
Yeah, some of this consideration is what is there now and what are the implications for the character type that's applied. And so ensuring that when we talk about, for example, appropriate zoning districts, that those things make sense together.
Yeah, and I think the theory of supply and demand is that if you make sure there's enough commercial space, then that will keep rental prices low. That's not been my experience as an adult, where so we end up with lots of commercial space that goes underutilized, and it's not really helping anything.
I do think, like, when we look at the appropriate zoning districts, like for all of South Division, like, it's, though TBA is listed there, I think maybe the intent of at least that is more of the transit-oriented development application that's also listed in here, so, yeah.
The other thing to think about, and something I think we've talked about internally a little bit, is in addition to removing some of those character types along the corridors, in an effort to intensify the nodes of development, actually applying that character type in a wider geographic area. And some of these, the intersection really is the only thing right now that is not strictly residential, and so there's a question about how much that is applied, but it is a consideration is actually to broaden the sort of radius of that character type to align better with the conceptual development framework nodes. Be interested in thoughts on that.
I mean, nodes look nice on paper, right? But we live on blocks and streets. So I think the streets plan connected with the types is the key,
Mhm.
right? And the nodes, again, they look nice and they're kind of inspiring, but we know that's not how it actually works.
It's not that simple.
Yeah. And even walking, I mean, if the circle's supposed to be a walking radius, it's fine, but we tend to walk on corridors.
Yeah.
More, not in radii.
Yeah, and I think that's the balance that, we have to find what that is, especially in applying these character types like the neighborhood center where, the experience of the street through a neighborhood is more linear, but we also need to sort of focus that in some meaningful way, so.
Going back to Kyle's point about Lake Michigan Drive, comparing this to the nodes map to this neighborhood centers map, those two are the TOD focus on Lake Michigan to align with the Laker line, so I think that makes sense.
So there's the current land use and then the future land use map. Are you able to show us the back and forth between them to see what is being proposed to change?
It is not a one-for-one comparison, unfortunately. I can show you both of them. I don't have this up here, but it's something that I could provide to have sort of side by side. But the categories don't sort of transfer in a way that would visually show you what those differences actually look like. The existing land use map is based on assessor's data, so it's truly the use of that parcel as opposed to sort of these broader categories.
Okay, that's fair. What about the current master plan future land use map compared to the proposed future land use map?
We could make that happen, yes. Yeah, we have both of those sets of information, so we could create that comparison.
Do like one of those slides.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Not for any particular agenda, except to help understand it better.
Absolutely.
About what we're actually proposing here.
And I think it's important to keep in mind how in our recommendations of vital business districts, we've also talked about having greater flexibility in the types of uses that are allowed. And so we're also not comparing specific land uses from today into tomorrow. So some of that will also change, so that sometimes makes it a more complicated analysis. But I think it's important that we remember that we are striving to be more flexible in the types of land uses than what we have today in our current ordinance.
Yeah, and that's also why I talk about sort of the use of this map in conjunction with the development nodes, because it may be appropriate that there are a mix of uses along a corridor. It's just that mix ratio might change a bit at those nodes, right? So just because it's a mixed use designation does not preclude more housing between those areas. But making sure that that's clear and intent is important, and I think we can probably do that through some revisions to the character type map. So I have notes to revisit campus and open space a bit with staff and just talk through what those thresholds should be and make sure we're really clear in the way that they're applied. Okay. The last piece of this chapter is a set of guidelines. These are intended to sort of encourage best practices, not to dictate any kind of design aesthetic, but this is sort of an additional qualitative component to consider when new development is occurring. It's broken up into sort of 3 tenets: compatible, pedestrian-oriented, and high quality. For compatible development, we're talking about building on the context of the place and advancing the vision of any applicable planning efforts, including area-specific plans. Pedestrian-oriented environments contribute to an active and inclusive public realm, and high-quality developments design resilient and visually interesting buildings. And then within each of these 3 tenets, there are a few guidelines that talk a bit more specifically about what we're trying to accomplish. So, for example, within the tenet of compatibility, building on the local identity and aspirations of the place, whether that be the site, the block, or the neighborhood. There are a number of ways that could be done. And then relating to local architectural and development patterns. The CMP does outline some strategies to meet this guideline. That's not intended to be an exhaustive list, just a way that these things could be accomplished. So, for example, under the first one relating to significant or iconic community structures and spaces, such as historic or cultural resources, civic amenities, natural areas, bridges, other natural boundaries, it is to give some guidance and inspiration to ways to fit into existing neighborhoods as the city grows and changes, but again is intended to be sort of a qualitative piece for reference and not dictate any specific style or specific strategy.
Interesting buildings is an interesting word choice and probably not very useful.
I may have had other words there in the past. I think that's one that has sort of come around a few times, and so I am open to other direction or additional direction from the commission if there are things that you think need to be emphasized, particularly based on the types of projects that you're seeing now and the guidance that you would like to be able to provide.
I think when you read the suggested strategies, it talks about depth to the facades, facade articulation, window depth, material fenestrations, incorporating street-facing decks. It's something that we've really struggled with internally, is that some of the buildings that we've seen constructed, and not just in the city of Grand Rapids, but around the country, everything's very, I want to say flat. And so really pushing for the articulation, such as what we're seeing in the screen, on the screen, pardon me. I think that's the canopy, if I remember, yeah, where we have the depth in the windows and such. And so that's what we are trying to say by interesting. But it sounds like a different word is necessary.
May I ask a question? What is meant by resilient?
So it does relate to sustainability and durability. And so this, for example, one of the strategies would be to design for flexible uses over time, so a building could be more easily converted based on preferences, market factors, other potential changes. The strategies within this do speak largely to sustainability and durability, but resilience is more about sort of adaptability within those realms.
I think this is a chapter that's really important to read the context behind it. If you just read the slide, I'm not sure that there's enough detail to really understand the recommendations here.
Yeah, the detail really is in the strategies, and unfortunately that does not read well in a presentation like this.
Yeah, because I take what Director Trickelson said as good and I think appropriate and proper, but if someone doesn't go to that layer of detail, they're going to maybe take away more of an opinion-based thing, and maybe Commissioner Swem might have a good suggested word for us. But
we'll put him on the spot next meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I would appreciate your thoughts on the strategy specifically. So if you do read through this and you think that something is missing, that's something I'm very interested in knowing.
Because even something like well-designed at least appeals to some objective idea that's not merely an opinion, which is my problem with the word interesting, because it might be interesting to one person but not to another. But yeah.
I will say, I guess it does under the high quality, interesting buildings, but yeah, in the design guideline itself, it just says integrate features that create visual interest. And so I think, yeah, It is there. I hear what you're saying, though.
Yeah, and it would, I mean, the implementation of this would require looking to that next level. So these are more titles than they are the full direction, and I don't know that we can provide the full direction without that next level of detail. So,
I mean, I think on the positive side, these are guidelines that are intended to inform future ordinance changes. So it would not be wise for us to put the visual interest in a zoning ordinance, but when it's a guideline and you read further into the actual strategy, I think that that's helpful to be able to get to that next step, which of course would be the zoning ordinance. So be a little bit more grace with the subjectivity and guidelines, because it's meant to be more descriptive.
yeah, they're intended to be flexible while getting at sort of what are the essential qualities of these buildings that we think will enhance the development.
And if I could go back to the development principles at the very beginning, number 2, and this is a positive reinforcement, that the way we stated it was one of our principles is to preserve and enhance the uniqueness of each neighborhood's history. And I think that really, captures it well. If we didn't have enhance, I think we would be suggesting we were locked in.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were not saying preserve at all, we would be urban renewal, wiping out whole things, and I think neither one of those is what we want.
Yes.
So I really appreciate preserve and enhance there.
This chapter is intending and trying to strike a balance, and I think that necessitates a lot of components that work together. Like I said, I welcome any thoughts as you look at this in more detail. We still have time. Okay, so the next section, this is actually Chapter 6 of the CMP, talks about area-specific plans. As I mentioned, Jamie Granger with Interface is here to help me field questions, but I'm going to sort of present the general content first. So within the master plan, there is essentially an executive summary to each of the area-specific plans that have been developed sort of in tandem with the CMP process. So there are 3 new area-specific plans intended to be adopted with the CMP. An area-specific plan is a neighborhood-specific framework intended to guide future improvements and investments in areas such as land use, zoning, transportation, and neighborhood character. To date, the city has completed 11 ASPs, so you see those in the grayed areas on the map. 3 additional ASPs will be adopted in conjunction with the CMP. That's Creston, Butterworth, and Southtown neighborhoods.
Before we get into the specific ASPs, we've had a conversation, at least at a staff level, that I think it's important to clarify. For me, this chapter could use some additional information, and I think why reinvent the wheel? We currently have some pretty good language in our O2 master plan that I've asked to be carried forward about what is the process, what is an area-specific plan, what is the process by which a community or neighborhood might would need to use. And so there's a lot of really good language that I think we can bring forward. So I feel like as it's currently drafted isn't quite as clear as I would like it to be. So we know that that's going to change. Also, I think we want to be very specific that the previously adopted area-specific plans are being readopted or carried forward as part of this. So although it's referenced here, I've asked that the language be a little bit more direct to make it very clear that those are chapters or subplans that are going to be pulled forward through this process.
How do those ASPs align with the future land characteristics map? They do?
Yep. Okay. Yep. So, of course, there's some translation as there is today, but they do still support the overarching themes and recommendations of this current plan. That was part of the evaluation process that we did both in the pre-plan phase, but also being cognizant of that as we move forward.
And then how old are what's the oldest ASP we have out there that's going to be readopted?
Oh, goodness. Elizabeth, do you recall what the oldest would be?
The oldest ASP that we have,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably Belknap.
Belknap?
There were a couple other ones, like the Brick Yacht and things like that, but those were a little bit different. So I think I would say Belknap.
Which was 2010.
Okay.
And I'll note that in the development of the future character and land use map, we did create this large spreadsheet that had all of the future character types from the various ASPs as they exist, and tried to sort of reference those to the character types that we're creating to make sort of a cohesive and well-aligned overall map. Obviously, that's not a perfect translation, but it was a consideration in sort of that look at the overall city.
Yeah, exactly. So that was part of the process. It's not easy to be, I guess, starting with the area-specific plans versus having the master plan done first. But what we heard through that pre-planning phase is that they are plans that are still valid, there's still ownership in them, and they still serve as the appropriate direction for the community. So it probably feels a little bit backwards in terms of that process, but yes, we did go through and worked hard to make sure that they align to the extent possible.
The three ASPs that we're going to talk about today did have the benefit of all of the information that we're working with. So these two processes being in alignment meant that the data that we were producing for the CMP was then informing the ASPs. And so you'll notice some overlap in sort of the broader direction, and the ASPs bring that down to the neighborhood level.
I appreciate those comments and agree with them. I would observe we have had a mixed level of sophistication with the different ASPs, and I understand that sometimes it has to do with funding and city resources and others. We also have the business area specific plan, which was a kind of a one-off different thing. But I believe the concept is a good one, and I'm glad we're not throwing all that out. We're bringing it forward. One technical question, we used to have for a PRD required that there be an ASP, and we removed that. Would that be a good thing to bring back to try to keep emphasis on the ASPs?
I mean, I think that's a policy discussion. I think administratively, that's not something that we find to be absolutely necessary. There are areas of the city that have wanted area-specific plans, for example, Creston being one of them. Now they are receiving an area-specific plan, but we didn't have the capacity to support them through that process. And so it seems like it would be unfair, inappropriate to eliminate a tool that supports what might be a very good development project that's well supported in the neighborhood because there isn't the area-specific plan in place. So I'm a little bit reluctant to eliminate that as a tool for us, understanding that there is certainly engagement expectations that go along with a PRD process that I think, because it's on a parcel-specific basis, serves I want to say a similar purpose, but it's probably a bit dramatic.
So I have a slide for each of the ASPs. They're organized around goals. So the first one is Creston. The Creston ASP is bounded by the river, 3 Mile Road, Fuller, and Leonard as sort of your approximate boundaries. The community engagement process for each of these ASPs, they had their own route. So there were 2 rounds of in-person public meetings to present findings from existing conditions analysis, share initial ideas, and gather community input. So within Creston, your goals are affordable and inclusive growth, a lively and unique neighborhood, safer streets for bicycling and walking, and revitalized and connected open spaces. You'll notice a lot of the same sort of concepts that we've talked about in the CMP being reflected here. So allowing for denser housing on key corridors and a variety of housing types in single-family districts, supporting existing homeowners and renters. That's something that came out of those meetings. Under Goal 2, there are recommendations to redevelop the riverfront as an innovation center. So if you think back to the character type map that we were just discussing, supporting Plainfield with new mixed-use development, and then storefront and facade repairs in neighborhood nodes. There's also an emphasis on improving pedestrian and bicycling connections on Plainfield Avenue and adding bicycle infrastructure throughout the neighborhood. There are some key connections that could be enhanced with additional infrastructure. And then some recommendations around these open spaces. So creating new plazas, better connecting Plainfield to the river along key streets, focusing on greening residential portions of the neighborhood, and then establishing a community vision for the redevelopment of Riverside Middle School. There's also a focus here on climate resilience overall and sort of the neighborhood level opportunities to boost Creston's climate resilience.
Yeah. So not on your slide, but in the ASP itself, there's a page, the community profile, and it talks about the housing values and rents. And I understand that it's different based on kind of the geography of not only the neighborhood, but our city, but the median home values seem just really low compared to what we're seeing now. So I guess maybe it's just when the data was pulled or something, but it's hard to believe that median home values are as low as they're showing here. It is page 5 of the actual ASP.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So this data is pulled from the most recent census. There's various levels of accuracy within census data. Home values probably being less accurate than population counts and things like that. So, we're pulling the best data we have, but I think it's probably worth acknowledging that maybe there might be a broader range in some of the data sets.
Maybe we should check if the housing needs assessment had data that could be isolated to this neighborhood. I think it's the Bowen study, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see if that data is available, see what that says.
Yeah, the difficulty would be getting it to be geographically specific, but it's worth looking into for sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure the level of detail that I don't remember those data sets well enough, but we can at least ask the question of Housing Next.
Absolutely.
Well, I would think the interest is in understanding the relative value compared to each neighborhood, not the absolute value, because we all know that changes quickly. So maybe converting it to normalizing it across the city.
Okay. Anything else before I move on? Okay. The next one is the Butterworth Area Specific Plan. Again, we have 4 goals: sustainable, equitable development, a vibrant and thriving business community, safer, walkable, and bikeable streets, and beautiful neighborhoods and healthy, active community spaces. For reference, Butterworth ASP is bounded by Watson, Lexington, Butterworth, Front, Wealthy, Marion, Park, and Deloney. So this is a slightly more complicated boundary, but if that helps sort of put this into context. Again, you're seeing under Goal 1 a lot of those recurring themes from the CMP around allowing for density housing and a variety of housing types in more areas. Redeveloping the riverfront as an innovation center. I think it's sort of as a city-wide perspective, that's an appropriate place for that character type to be mapped, and that happens to show up in both of these ASPs. Focus on adaptive reuse in existing buildings, particularly with an art and maker focus, and supporting Butterworth as a neighborhood serving commercial street. There's also a desire for improved pedestrian and bicycling infrastructure. There was a conversation about developing alleys as an alternative pedestrian network and community space, and the opportunity to do more within those spaces, as well as generally improving existing trail and bicycle connections within the neighborhood. The Goal 5 about sort of beautiful neighborhoods and these healthy, active community spaces recommends exploring additional programming and ongoing stewardship of Westtown Commons Park, and then identifying new public space opportunities within the neighborhood, and generally increasing the tree canopy, particularly as things change. So. No? Okay.
I don't know, Jamie, if this question is for you, but in the past, maybe the more recent area-specific plans, this concept of a parking hold line was a pretty common strategy that the business areas of the corridor liked, and I think because and maybe even the neighbors, because it set kind of an expectation for, as businesses changed or grew or expanded, that there was an acknowledgement that more land could be used for parking if so desired, and it sort of had an agreed upon limit as to how that parking or where that parking could be expanded. Did that come up with the Butterworth neighbors?
It didn't come up, specifically. Butterworth's kind of an interesting street in that, it's not like a traditional. Well, I know I don't want to use the term traditional neighborhood district because I know that's like a more concrete definition within the CMP, but it's kind of a mix between commercial spaces and residential and some light industrial. So it's actually, there's more residential buildings facing it than commercial properties. So it's kind of an interesting mix. So I think, from the level of commercial spaces that exist there now, there's probably sufficient parking. If the properties were to redevelop, that might be different in the future. There is the access to the alleys from a lot of these commercial properties. So we do reference potentially having parking for commercial spaces in the rear of properties that could be accessed through alleys and kind of keep it off the street. But it honestly didn't come up too much specifically around the parking hold line.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the thought given to the innovation, maybe the amount of land that's dedicated to that innovation center, and especially given the range of uses that could be contemplated there. There's just such large parcels that seem to like they might hold a lot of potential in the future. And I appreciate that those are in the innovation center versus the manufacturing and logistics.
Yeah, I think the proximity to GVSU and their expansions and some of the newer businesses that are existing there, like Grand River Aseptic, which are kind of more advanced technology, it makes sense to think about it in that character type.
Okay. The final ASP is the Southtown Neighborhoods ASP. This has even more convoluted bounding streets, so we will just say that it is generally eastern, with bounding at Wealthy to the north and Alger to the south. And, the goals here are development without displacement, a community built by all for all, and preserving local culture. So within development without displacement, recommendations to explore partnerships to build affordable housing on underutilized properties, support and expand a community land trust, and then again, those recommendations that sort of are pervasive throughout these documents about increasing housing density and variety of housing that is available. Within Goal 2, there is a focus on preserving existing affordable housing, promoting home repair programs that allow people to maintain the homes that they're in, developing additional mechanisms to protect residents from displacement, because while it's a focus in this neighborhood, there are other strategies that could be put in place at a broader scale. Creating more pathways for residents to provide input on changes in their neighborhood, and then supporting resident-led small-scale development, which again, you've seen in the CMP, but is focused at a smaller scale, more neighborhood-tailored level. Within Goal 3, there's an emphasis on supporting neighborhood nodes with new mixed-use development, improvements to bicycle facilities, transit facilities, pedestrian crossings, implementing the design guidelines, particularly where there are large lot infill opportunities, and building upon existing sort of development there, and then identifying vacant lots that could be activated as new green spaces.
Could we consider Goal 3 to be preserve and enhance local culture for the reasons mentioned before?
Yeah, most definitely.
Yes. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Just a note that we're calling this Southtown Neighborhoods because the BASP covers the business district. So this is really focused more on the residential areas, and the two plans are intended to complement each other.
And about a couple weeks ago, Layla and I did go to the Southtown Corridor Improvement Authority to present this planning effort, to make sure it was clear about how these would work together and complement, and why we felt that that was important. And I would say it was a positive meeting. We didn't ask for, formal support or anything like that, but we wanted to make sure that the Corridor Improvement Authority was fully aware of the details of the plan, and had the opportunity to review it and provide comment in the future should they so choose.
Can you go back to the last one? So Goal 4, where is it? Talks about trees, tree canopy.
The very last one, increasing
Yeah.
the tree canopy as the Innovation Center develops.
Right. So if we're tying tree canopy to innovation centers, can we not put that concept in the character, innovation center character? If that's
Yeah.
appropriate, because I think it's desirable, and I would just observe, we've identified some part of the 28th Street corridor as innovation center, and it always strikes me every time I travel 28th Street how Wyoming seems to have improved the 28th Street experience quite a bit more than Grand Rapids, and why is that? And I often just come back to trees. We just have a lot more trees. It just feels better. We also have better pavement, but.
Trees.
Yeah, I'll add in Creston and Butterworth, the residential neighborhoods are pretty leafy and have good tree coverage, but it's, those kind of former industrial areas where there's almost none, and it's a very abrupt kind of difference between the two areas. So just thinking about, as this place develops into the future, what are some of those important things that we could consider in addition to, increased housing and commercial opportunities and all of that.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. All right. Then the last piece that I have for you is just an update on the status of public comments that we've received so far. I just wanted to note that the information I'm presenting in the subsequent slides goes through last Friday. We've received 3 additional comments from one person this week. So this is generally comprehensive. There was nothing that came in those 3 comments that changes any of what I'm going to present today. So this is organized by chapter around sort of primary themes. You'll note in the bottom the number of comments that have been tagged for that chapter. So when we receive comments through the website, folks have the opportunity to tell us what chapter they're commenting on versus just general comments. So half approximately of the comments we've received so far have been on great neighborhoods. We have 68 total comments at this point. Nothing in this that is particularly surprising. We've received sort of equal comments in opposition to and support for increased density. The opposition to increased density is generally about introducing multifamily apartments into single-family residential areas. There are comments that express resistance to increased density in what are consistently referred to as stable neighborhoods. That's terminology from the comments. Due to fears of, congestion, parking issues, changes to the neighborhood, I think things that you have likely heard in this room before. And then this on sort of the opposite side, there's support for increased density, particularly around missing middle and the desire to see it in more places. So we have sort of both ends of that spectrum. We also heard quite a bit about support for mixed-use developments within neighborhoods and allowances for home businesses, micro-retail, commercial units at intersections, so additional uses within our neighborhood designations. We also received a number of comments about references to setbacks. I know that a lot of this comes from the way that the strategies and the guidelines have been written. Setbacks are mentioned a number of times as potential strategies to meet those guidelines. And with that, there is also a request to sort of update other codes to allow more flexibility in development and increase housing options. So that's sort of a general theme, is more flexibility leads to more opportunities. So there are calls for flexible zoning regulations to accommodate a range of housing types, mixed-use developments, support innovation and development practices. Most of these are comments that say this is good, but we could go further.
Yeah, so related to the setbacks question, so we did have someone come and provide public comment about that here too, and so, yeah, I guess it's something to just keep in mind as we're revising the code after, or the zone, the ordinance after this, about just making sure we're allowing.
Yeah, and I think, as we move into the implementation phase, which would of course be the zoning ordinance, really looking at what our setbacks are, especially on parcels that are smaller in width, making sure that we say we want the infill housing and to maximize the locations where it can go, especially where we have undeveloped land. And yet, if our setbacks remain as they are, perhaps that might make it very difficult to construct a home that is appropriate for that location.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that they said you wouldn't be able to build, and I know, you wouldn't be able to build my house with the current setbacks either, probably, like in terms of like how close it is to the lot line and the driveway and all of that stuff. So, interesting.
So this is one place that, I think it's really important that we're very clear about what the plan is recommending. We've had a lot of really good conversation about housing density in our traditional neighborhoods. This would be looking to expand that same methodology into our modern era and our mid-century, and looking at those higher volume commercial corridors. But the recommendation for 1B2 would allow for, I think it was up to 4 plexes in all areas of a residentially zoned neighborhood. And so it expands it quite a bit. So that's one of those, we called it out, I think, in the bold change, the bold policy change. So as we get feedback, I think it's really critical that we look and say, is that what we want? Is there a phased implementation? So I just think we want to be very mindful of what we're recommending and how we move forward. But we did hear quite a bit of desire from those that participated in our engagement process about having more housing types in all areas of the city. But yet we probably hear differing opinions when we actually have public hearings about some housing types. But, there of course is nuances in terms of the scale of the project. And in this case, it's up to 4 plexes. There's still density requirements, setbacks, green space. All of those important elements are still in place, but it is a bold change from current policy.
So is your point we should be rethinking the strategy or just understand that?
I don't know that I'm suggesting we rethink it because the recommendation is based on the input we received. But I just want to make sure that we're very mindful about what the plan is, especially since we're starting to get feedback on it. So.
Yes, so what Kristen just talked about was 1B2, and then 1B3 talks about, it says consider allowing up to 6 units on lots fronting Link Residential and Network Residential streets in the MCN and MON, which is part of the comments that we've received for your consideration.
Good.
All right.
Okay. For Vital Business District, we've received 2 comments, both of which in support of more business types, specifically allowing accessory commercial units and live-work units at every intersection. And this is a direct quote, micro businesses everywhere. So we've seen through not just these 2 comments, but you also see in Strong Economies sort of this desire for those sort of small-scale commercial uses to be allowed in more portions of the city. And I'm going to just also present Strong Economy, where we got 1 comment desire for allowing live-work units everywhere. So I think these things sort of go hand in hand, although they are tagged in different chapters.
Which, other than the industrial zone district, I think we do allow live-work units everywhere, understanding that there is, of course, a relationship between building code and what's permitted and zoning. But we have not, and this plan does not recommend allowing residential uses in our industrial areas, so.
Balanced mobility, we received 12 comments, many of which are on parking. And again, similar to the density conversation, we have support for eliminating parking minimums and opposition due to the suggested reduction of parking minimums. So in the sort of support, on the support side, there is a desire to go further, remove minimum parking requirements throughout the city, with a focus on its impact for sustainable development, reduction of costs, repurposing spaces for other uses. Most of the concerns we've heard about the recommendation to reduce parking are about how eliminating mandates might affect business viability, pushing a need for a balanced approach. A lot of this comes from folks who do not see viable alternatives. And so I think, again, probably many of the same conversations that you've had before, but we are seeing comments from sort of both of those sides. There's a general sentiment about, improving bicycle and pedestrian facilities, so bike lanes, pedestrian paths, crosswalks, with an emphasis on maintenance, safety, year-round usability. We've gotten a number of comments about sort of enforcement to ensure safety. And then, again, this is something we heard throughout the whole process about, support for expanding public transit options. We heard commuter rail comments a few times through this. So, other options to connect and reduce reliance on personal vehicles. Then we received one comment on Chapter 5, Desirable Development Character, which is just a note that the current future character and land use map is not colorblind friendly, which is a very valid comment and noted. There will be an online plan as a public-facing version of this work, and so we're looking into opportunities to make that more accessible for more folks. So there are a number of ways we could address that, but again, we've made a note of this and we're looking into options for that. Within sort of the general comments bucket, there are a number of people calling for improved communication enforcement of laws, particularly around crosswalks and bike lanes. So this sort of safety component is not directly within the purview of the CMP, but certainly something that we've touched on, and I think, unsurprising that we've heard some of these comments. There's generally sort of a tension between neighborhood preservation and new development. So, comments expressing concern about potential changes to established neighborhoods, particularly around multifamily housing in areas that are currently dominated by single-family homes. And then general comments related to affordable housing and access, and a lot of advocacy for guaranteed access to safe and affordable housing, concerns about the loss of affordable units and the need for sustainable strategies to ensure long-term housing security, some of which, fall within sort of the scope of this work, some of which relate to other efforts, but again, reflect what we've seen throughout the process. That's all I have, other than to remind you that there's a little bit more to do.
Yeah, thank you. So our next step is for us to provide a report on October 8th to the City Commission, where we would generally summarize the deliberations of today and provide City Commission with an abbreviated version of what was just presented. As of right now, we excuse me, sorry, have a placeholder to come back to the Planning Commission to provide you with an update on any comments that were received between last Friday and the October 10th meeting. Again, intended to help process so that you're not seeing all of the comments all at once on your public hearing, which is currently scheduled for October 24th. And then, of course, the anticipated process or not anticipated process, I'm sorry. The anticipated adoption would be for December.
I will just note that we received the majority of the comments in the first few weeks, and we have sort of seen a slowdown in that, which is not uncommon.
Yeah, I was going to say, will there be another kind of like social media push now that we're a few weeks out or a couple weeks out?
We could do that. I know it's also, yes, I can work with our social media team to be like, last call, give us your comments before it moves into the next phase. It's also been going out in the GR Connected newsletter that the city sends. It's like our largest newsletter, and that's been going out in every edition. I believe it's a couple times a month since the public comment period opened.
Okay. So any questions, concerns with where we're at? And I guess, is there anything that the Planning Commission needs from staff or a consultant so that you feel comfortable with, hopefully making a decision on the 24th? No? All right.
Has this presentation been shared with us, or has it been shared with us? Or is it online?
We have not emailed that to you, but there's no reason we couldn't post them to our webpage, and then we can send out a link to all the presentations that have been provided. All right, well, that's everything we had for your last deep dive into the content of the plan.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll have discussion, general discussion, anything?
I was thinking yesterday at the Michigan Association of Planning Conference, in the morning, MAP, Michigan Association of Planning, unveiled their zoning atlas pilot, of which Ottawa, Kent, and Muskegon County were included in that pilot. And it's really fascinating, and I'll send you a link to that tool. Laurel was there as well, Commissioner Joseph, pardon me. And effectively what they've done is analyze all of the local zoning ordinances, and if a new developer or even an experienced one wanted to say, I want to build a 4-unit, what land is available for me to build a 4-unit multifamily development? And then it highlights all of the parcels in all of the jurisdictions. And then you can also factor down, what's by right or what might be a conditional review process, like a special land use. And so I think it's a really exciting tool. So I'm going to email out the link just so that you have that available. I know that MAP did invite several individuals from the media to hopefully push out the information that's there. Some of the conversations that Commissioner Joseph and I had is, how do we maintain this as we move forward, and what does it look like when you make zoning changes? So I'm not 100% certain if the zoning atlas was predating the April decisions or not. But how do we provide those updates? So there's still a little bit of work to be done in terms of what that next steps. But I think I can only believe that collectively between the 3 counties would be very interested in figuring out how do we pull together to maintain that, and what does the ownership look like in terms of who takes ownership of getting that data inputted. So I thought that was a pretty fun announcement and a tool that the MAP has created for us. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the answer that we got at that session was that there's no budget for updating at this point. So we do need to figure out something, as a region for sure.
And as you may have heard, Housing Next is currently working on a corridor strategy that at least preliminarily does seem to align with the work that we're doing here. On October 10th, which is a Planning Commission day, a lot of the regional planners are being invited to a session to learn more. So we will definitely have some staff present with the Housing Next team to really make sure we understand the components, but really looking at ways to look at our corridors, our higher volume streets like Plainfield, 28th Street, and capitalize on some of the residential densities that could be available and really move the needle in terms of providing some additional housing. One of my asks to Housing Next will be to come to the Planning Commission to provide a presentation so that you're comfortable with that as well. That's all I have.
As is our custom, we'll open up for public comment for anyone who would like to address the commission. Seeing none, we'll close the public comment, and we are adjourned.